Chapter 61, Remarks on the Launch. First of all, thank you to all my readers for your support. Here's my update plan. Tomorrow, Monday, I will post 10 consecutive updates. They won't all go out at once, but they will all be published before nightfall. After that initial burst, I will update 10,000 characters every day. For every 500 increase in average subscriptions, I'll celebrate with 2 bonus chapters. Those extra chapters will start on the second day after the subscription increase, which effectively raises the daily output to about 15,000 characters during that celebration. You can rest assured about my update volume. My previous book was set in Mongolia, and I managed 10,000 characters a day for 7 months straight. As long as subscriptions stay strong, I can keep writing 10,000 characters daily without any problem. If monthly votes reach 1,000 tickets, I'll add a bonus update of 5,000 characters on top of the base 10,000. If it reaches 2,000 tickets, I'll add another bonus update. I don't dare imagine anything beyond that yet. If there's a Sect Master reward, I'll go all out for a full week and update 15,000 characters each day. If the initial subscriptions are strong tomorrow, say 2,000 real readers and over 3,000 fake readers, and overall subscriptions hit 2,000, I'll launch another burst and post 10 chapters the next day. If subscriptions are good, I'll write fiercely. I promise to keep my word. I won't say much else. In short, everyone, just watch me go on an update spree. Tonight, I'll be up all night writing. Chapter 62, Go Meet the Magic Pony, Interstellar Communication Base Station. First update, please subscribe. Even after being defeated, wounds could still appear on their bodies. In the movies, when Cell, Frieza, and a band of villains spilled out of the underworld during the tumult, they looked no different from the living except for a halo hovering above their heads. Even Vegeta, dead, could fuse with the living Son Goku to become Vegito, completely breaking the boundary between life and death. In Dragon Ball Super, Frieza could even train in heaven and gradually master his golden form. All of this pointed to one truth. Ki in the Dragon Ball world not only strengthens the body but the soul as well. Life and death seemed insufficient to change that. The soul and body felt integrated. Micardo had said that his soul in the warp appeared as a faint projection, like ordinary folk of the Imperium. Axis, however, believed his soul should shine like the sun. It was only the means of observation that differed. The souls of humans and other races in the Warhammer universe manifested as projections in the warp, while his own soul resided within his body. The warp projection was probably only a shadow. This war had reinforced Axis's suspicion. A weak soul could not possibly have detected Astartes across half a planet at once, using Ki. Father, since we've finished this mission, how about we go to Prospero to see Magnus? Axis asked. He wanted to test his hypothesis immediately, to meet Magnus, to exchange knowledge about the warp, even to learn some psychic techniques. Unlike other Primarchs, Magnus had explored the warp more than any of them. His research into psychic power rivaled the Emperor's. If Magnus's soul was truly as potent as Axis suspected, then theoretically it should be capable of drawing psychic energy from the warp. Psychic power in combat, combined with Ki's resistance to warp corruption, would make one far less vulnerable to the Chaos Gods. For safety, Axis even thought he might experiment with the cultivators. They were the only other beings in this universe besides him who wielded Kai. Good, Leman Russ replied. If you're interested, I'll go with you to see Magnus. The Primarchs who had returned to the Imperium were swamped with duties and rarely saw their homeworlds, but they could still take a few months' leave between campaigns so long as it didn't slow the Great Crusade. Prospero was not far. A detour there before resuming their duties was reasonable. Then it's decided. I'll report the mission status to the Emperor first, and then arrange the custodies, Axis said. Leman Russ smiled. Go, my little wolf cub. Tell it all as it is. You've earned merit this time. There should be a reward. Axis nodded, then took his leave and went back to his quarters. Once the custodes departed in a few days, he planned to use the cultivator's key to strengthen the Wolf Guard Space Marines. Duo, that special cultivator, would be formally introduced to the Wolf Guard. These 2 cultivators wouldn't just fight. Axis intended to use them to fortify others, to train them as healers, even as test subjects. In his room, Kasha sat on a bench with a shadowed expression, waiting for Axis to return. "You're finally back, my lord. Will you tell me the outcome of this campaign? I need to report the latest to the Emperor," she said, drawing the words out. "I just spoke with Russ," Axis replied. "Now I'll tell you the full details. At the start of the battle, I used Ki to launch something from high above the planet. You know the rest. I used Ki to heal the second Primarch's mind," Axis explained, laying out what had happened. "Your Ki can really do that? Kill tens of thousands of Astartes in an instant?" Kasha asked, stunned. She had suspected, but hearing it confirmed shook her. It was terrifying. From orbit, the world looked as if macro cannons had pulverized it. "Don't underestimate Kai. It's immensely destructive, but it has other properties, and it's not as difficult to control as warp psychic power," Axis said. "You're not entirely ignorant of the warp. If you want, I can tell you about it," Kasha offered. One of her duties was to make Axis understand the warp's horrors and its truth. "No, thanks. I have no interest in warp things," Axis said, waving his hand. He didn't want to fall into any test set by the Emperor using a Psyker daughter to probe him. A firm refusal was safest. If asked, he would always claim no interest in the warp. Yet Axis knew in his bones that understanding an enemy made it easier to defeat. The Emperor's goal of freeing humanity from the warp and chaos was noble, but the approach and the consequences were problematic. And the Imperium could not do without the warp entirely. Not for communication, not for navigation. In fact, the combat power detector Axis had given the Emperor had cross-galactic communication capabilities. Vegeta and Nappa could intercept conversations from Raditz, Son Goku, Piccolo, and others from astonishing distances. Frieza had learned of the Dragon Balls through those detectors. That method was extraordinary, but it worked only within the Dragon Ball framework. To build an equivalent interstellar communication system would require a network of massive base stations, like satellites. Frieza's empire had such stations on countless worlds to keep an empire-wide signal. Humanity's current technology could not build such infrastructure. If the Necrons got their hands on this technique, they might be able to construct long-range communications without the warp, though the Necrons already possessed their own methods. Humanity had stagnated for 10,000 years. It was maddening. Worse, the cipherbox Axis had created could have its unlocking method fall into dangerous hands. It's understandable you fear the warp. It is dangerous, and psychic power can bring many calamities. Still, the Imperium has safeguards. Sanctioned psychers, the navigator houses, even the Gellerfield's merchant vessels and warships use when entering the warp. These are protective measures, Kasha said. After witnessing Axis's demonstrations and traveling the warp herself, his curiosity was natural. "I plan to have 16 custodes escort the second Primarch back to Holy Terra," Axis said. "I'll stay here with the Space Wolves." "You mean leave them on Holy Terra?" Kasha asked. It was a shrewd plan. She didn't hold the custodes in much affection after the time she had been imprisoned by those armored guardians, but she knew this would be difficult. Those 16 custodes were also a reminder from the Emperor to Axis of who he was. Axis could return to the Space Wolves and the Great Crusade, but his standing was custodian before Space Marine. The Emperor's order was to eliminate the second Primarch, but I saved him. That's beyond the mission's expectation. I should get a reward, Axis said with a smile. If that failed, he could subtly reveal more functions of the combat power detector. The Emperor probably hadn't discovered all of its capabilities yet. Once he did, he would study it relentlessly. It was far too significant for humanity. "I can ask for it on your behalf," Kasha said, "but don't hope for too much. The most likely outcome is that they'll return after delivering the second Primarch." "File the report first," Axis said. It seemed she too wanted the custodes kept on Terra. Kasha did as asked and sent her psychic report to her father through the warp. The Emperor was not on Holy Terra at that moment. He was on Baal, preparing to welcome home his 9th son, another Primarch returning to the Imperium. "What is it, Kasha? How goes your mission?" The Emperor asked as soon as he received her communication. Chapter 63. Emperor, my custodes have become Space Marines. Second update, please subscribe. The human Emperor frowned. According to his calculations, Axis and the others should have arrived only a day ago. For Axis to annihilate an entire Second Legion and then kill the second Primarch would have taken at least 10 days, maybe longer. Following that, carrying out a proper exterminatus would require at least 2 months. Something had clearly gone wrong with the schedule. Or, the Emperor considered darkly, the Rhydon had returned. "Great Lord of mankind, I have something to report," Kasha said. "Has something gone wrong with the mission? Have you encountered difficulties?" the human Emperor asked. "No, Great Lord, the mission was successful," Kasha replied. Although the woman standing before him was his biological daughter, she could not address him as father. She was only a sanctioned psyker. Only after completing the mission and restoring her official status could she call him that. "The mission was successful? How is that possible? Did you accelerate through the warp and arrive early?" the Emperor asked, incredulous. When traveling through the warp, you could arrive on time, years late, or, more rarely, early. He suspected Axis had managed to arrive a month ahead of schedule. "We did not arrive early. We reached the target system only yesterday," Kasha said. "You mean Axis and Leman Russ finished the mission in a single day?" The Emperor could no longer sit still. It was absurd. He had expected great difficulty. His gene seed Primarchs were not to be dismissed. "Report everything, down to the smallest detail. I want the full battle results." Kasha relayed it all. Axis did not kill the second Primarch. He used chi energy to heal the Primarch's brain injury. The Second Legion, however, could not be saved. Over 90% were lost. Only Hatred 32 survived. Silence fell. Axis had done it in hours, not days. He had single-handedly broken a Space Marine Legion and dealt with a Primarch, a feat the Emperor himself might have needed to intervene for. What astonished him most was that the second Primarch had actually been saved. Axis had used chi not only as a weapon, but as a healing art. When the Emperor had first sensed that chi, he had known there was life in it. He had not expected Axis to master its curative aspects so quickly. Crude as the technique was, it worked, and Axis would only refine it further. "You did well. I will reward everyone. Send the second Primarch to Holy Terra at once," the Emperor said, satisfaction in his voice. "Great Lord, there is one more matter to report. Now that the second Primarch survived, should we still carry out the exterminatus?" Kasha asked. Russ had already decided against it, but formally, the Emperor's will was final. "With the Primarch alive, the Second Legion need not be exterminated. The exterminatus is cancelled in my name," the Emperor declared. He was not bloodthirsty. Exterminatus had been intended to protect the secret of the Primarch's death. With the Primarch rescued, the incident could be treated as a hard-fought but ordinary battle. Although crippled, the Legion could be rebuilt in decades so long as the Gene Seed Primarch lived. "I will inform everyone," Kasha said. The Emperor paused, then moved on. "Axis will remain with the Space Wolves. You will accompany him. Any other questions?" "Great Lord, Axis suggested that 16 custodian guards escort the second Primarch to Holy Terra and provide close protection," Kasha answered carefully. 4 custodians are enough to escort a Gene Seed Primarch. "Would Axis prefer that the custodian squad not remain with him?" the Emperor guessed. It was not unexpected that his daughter might be uneasy around the custodes. Axis, by title, was a custodian captain, though his modifications were those of a Gene Seed Primarch. If a squad of custodians accompanied Russ permanently, it would send a message. Kasha explained bluntly, "The custodian guard is your authority incarnate. If 16 custodians are stationed long-term with the Space Wolves, other Gene Seed Primarchs might draw conclusions. They could suspect Russ has received unusual favor from you, perhaps more than even Horus." The Emperor considered the politics. He could imagine how his first son, Horus, returned sooner than most and already influential, would react. He had to be cautious. "The custodian guard represents imperial authority. Ask Axis if he truly wants the custodian squad recalled." Kasha broke off the warp link and looked to Axis. "Axis, the human Emperor asks whether you want all 16 custodian guards recalled to Holy Terra rather than having them accompany you." "I'm sure," Axis replied. "Their presence here would cause unnecessary trouble. I don't want to remain known as a custodian. I want to be here as a Space Marine. Tell the human Emperor I'm willing to trade this merit for that." Axis had already worked it out. His height and bearing could pass as a space marine. Fewer people would see a captain who simply looked like a regular Astartes. Kasha relayed his request. The human emperor thought for a moment, then conceded. Tell Axis that, because he saved the second Primarch, I will allow him to temporarily resign his custodian status. He will serve alongside Leman Russ as a Space Marine captain. The Emperor recognized the problems a permanent custodian presence would cause. Axis might return to his custodian role in 200 or 300 years after the Great Crusade. His deeds were sufficient. The Emperor also suspected another reason Axis wanted the custodians away, the inherent flaws in the wolf gene seed. As creator of the gene seed Primarchs and the Astartes legions, he knew the compromises he had made. The warp's technology exacted a price. Axis must have learned the Wolf Guard's secret and wanted to protect the Space Wolves by minimizing custodian influence. The Emperor was pleased the second Primarch had been saved and granted Axis his wish. One more thing, the memories of everyone involved must be cleared. You are responsible for that, the Emperor added. I understand, Great Lord, Kasha said, and cut the psychic link. As soon as the link ended, relief and pleasure flooded Kasha's features. If Axis could shed the custodian mantle, she could too. She turned to him with a bright smile. Congratulations, Axis. Starting today, you will temporarily resign as custodian captain and become a Space Marine captain. Only Leman Russ and I will know your true identity. That's good news, Axis said. What about those who already know I'm a custodian? I will use psychic power to erase their memories. Only Russ and I will retain the truth, Kasha replied. Chapter 64, Clearing Memory, Kaisa's Golden Psychic Power, Part 3. Please subscribe. Then what about the custodes? Will they not know my identity either? Can you wipe their memories? Axis asked. Psychic power made memory clearing almost effortless. A wave of will and a recollection could be folded away. Kasha's expression betrayed her pleasure. She clearly did not much like the custodes either. Axis wondered why, but did not press. If necessary, I can clear the custodes' memories as well, Kasha replied. But they are the Emperor's personal guard. There's no point hiding this from them. After this, they will return to Holy Terra and will not spread it. Without Sisters of Silence protecting them, even custodes could be vulnerable to a Psyker's influence. Kasha added that Sisters of Silence varied in strength. The weakest among them could be penetrated by a mind like hers, since her power was inherited from the Emperor. Axis nodded. Her Psyker strength was indeed impressive. This time, the Emperor had been accommodating. Axis did not even need to use the ship's long-range comms. He still planned to tell the Emperor about the space communication station later, but not yet. Russ and he wanted to study the fighter's potential to communicate across star systems through trial and error before releasing such technology. Kasha, let's inform the custodes of the orders. Tomorrow we begin the memory clearing. Quite a few people know my identity now. Once we've cleared them, we'll explain that the custodes were involved in the operation and took the individual away. That should be enough, Axis said. Kasha nodded. The two left at once and summoned the 16 custodes from their nearby quarters. Axis Shield Guard Captain, do you have a mission for us? One of the custodes asked. Yes. Kasha has already contacted the Emperor by psychic link. 16 of you will pilot this destroyer back to Holy Terra and escort the second Primarch and his gene seed offspring, Axis announced. By the Emperor's command, the Custodes squad will carry out the escort and ensure the safe transport of the second Primarch back to Holy Terra, the 16 Custodes replied, saluting. This time, I will not return to Holy Terra with you, Axis continued. I will conceal my Custodes' identity. I will remain as a Space Marine of the Space Wolves Legion. Keep this matter secret. This is the Emperor's command. None of the Custodes objected. To them, the Emperor's word was absolute. They would obey even unto death. The idea of their captain taking a Space Marine's mantle was mystifying, but they accepted it without complaint. It was merely a reassignment. Tomorrow morning, you'll depart with the second Primarch. For now, rest, Kasha said, nodding to the Custodes before leaving the room with Axis. Once they were gone, one of the Custodes could not contain his confusion. Why would our captain become a Space Marine? Isn't that a demotion? He asked incredulously. Custodes were stronger than Space Marines in physique, tactics, and armament. The notion that the greatest among them would choose to become a space marine seemed absurd, like a space marine deciding to join the Imperial Army. Kasha answered simply, "We do not question. We are the Emperor's guards. We follow his will." The others fell silent and returned to their bunks. It was a disappointment for some. Many had hoped to grow under their captain's tutelage, but 2 months of the enhancements Axis had shared had already raised their physical baseline by 20%. The further strengthening effects were tapering off. The boon was someone else's power, and they had received their share. The night passed uneventfully. Early the next morning, Kasha and Axis went to Russ's cabin and explained what had transpired. "Ha ha ha! I knew Father would agree," Russ chuckled. "Want me to gather all the Space Wolves?" The Space Wolves were fiercely loyal. If they cooperated, the Psyker could significantly reduce the workload by sweeping memories en masse. There were Imperial devices for erasing or altering minds, but such tools were crude and ill-suited to Space Marines. A Psyker's touch was far cleaner. "Please, Lord Russ," Kasha said. Russ nodded and summoned everyone who had been aboard the Gloriana-class battleship Hrafnkel and had contact with Axis in the last days. Space Wolves, gene-seed offspring, many mortals, and several Imperial Navy personnel. Nearby destroyers were kept in the dark. They only knew a Custodes squad had arrived, and so were not involved. When all were assembled, Leman Russ addressed them. "Warriors of the Space Wolves, my gene-seed offspring, we have completed a glorious mission, but it contains an Imperial secret. You must all forget it." "Great Wolf Father, it is our duty to keep the Imperium's secrets," one Space Marine said, thumping his power armor. The others echoed the gesture. Russ nodded. "Very good. You will now undergo a memory wipe. You will lose specific recollections. Do not resist." Some were uneasy, but with their gene father present and 16 custodes standing nearby, no one protested. "We obey the command of the great All-Father," they said in unison. Russ gave Kasha the signal. In the central chamber of the Hrafnkel, Kasha raised her psychic scepter. Her eyes flared with a golden light, and a powerful tide of psychic energy rolled outward. Axis felt the surging mental currents at his side. The golden power washed through the hall and touched each Space Wolves warrior. Confusion flashed across faces as Kasha selectively erased the targeted memories. Even though Axis had remained with the Space Wolves, he had undergone Space Marine modifications and had only gone to Holy Terra briefly for advanced training. Now, after the mission, he would return to the Wolves along with the Custodes. Kasha's work taxed her. Clearing memories from so many Space Marines at once was no small burden, even for a powerful Psyker, but she worked meticulously. The Space Marines did not resist. Their formidable wills made the process difficult, but successful. "It's done," Kasha said finally, lowering her scepter and exhaling. Her golden power faded. Russ stepped forward. "Now you will only remember that a Custodes squad carried out a secret operation and removed several important individuals. Do not seek other details." "For the Emperor," the Space Wolves answered. Axis watched as vacant spaces opened in their expressions, memory gaps where the events had been. The precision of Kasha's manipulation impressed him. Her power was stronger than he'd realized. Russ grinned and slapped Kasha on the shoulder. With such a Psyker in their legion, many future complications would be easier to handle. He wondered privately why her psychic light was golden. There was something familiar about it, a resonance that reminded him of their father. Kasha turned then to the mortal crew and servitors gathered at the rear. Mortal wills were weaker and far easier to alter. She raised the scepter again. Golden ripples spread, and the Navy personnel accepted the modification without struggle. When the last mortal's eyes dimmed, Kasha allowed herself a long, tired smile. "All right, it's finished. Except for a few of us, no one will remember the second Primarch or Axis," she said. Everyone returned to their duties. The 16 Custodes and the second Primarch, with his gene-seed offspring, boarded the destroyer that had brought Axis and company. They prepared to depart for Holy Terra, while Axis remained behind, his new identity as a Space Marine among the Space Wolves concealed, for the present, by the will of the Emperor and the golden touch of Kasha's psychic power. Chapter 65, Russ and Kasha, the favor of the second Primarch. Fourth update, please subscribe. "I'm going to see off our custodian guard brothers," Axis said to Kasha and Russ. "Go, Axis. Say your goodbyes, but don't draw attention, Russ replied. They had been comrades once, and this parting could mean decades or centuries before they met again. A proper farewell was deserved. Axis nodded, then turned and headed toward the vast hangar of the Gloriana-class battleship. When Axis had gone, Russ looked meaningfully at the woman beside him. "Is something the matter, Lord Russ?" Kasha asked with a smile. Russ remembered her from the incubation pod. He had seen her then, but he'd been misled about her origins. He and the others had scattered their brothers across the galaxy. "Your psychic power feels familiar," Russ said. "It resembles the power the father used when he found me on Fenris." Sending Axis to the hangars, besides arranging the farewell to the custodians, also had the practical effect of removing him from the conversation. Russ wanted to know more about Kasha's origins. "The Psyker's powers are all similar," Kasha replied. "Perhaps mine happens to resemble the Emperor's." "You are not like the others," Russ said. "When most Psykers use their gifts, there's a chill to it. I do not like many of them because their power feels corrupt, even if the Imperium needs them. Your power feels warm. The only other time I felt that was from the Emperor." Kasha's psychic aura, while not as blindingly radiant as the Emperor's, had indeed been unusually gentle and warm, utterly unlike the cold alien tang of most warp talents. "Have you met many Psykers, Lord Russ?" she asked. "Many," Russ answered. "Every vessel needs Psykers for warp communication and to guard against its malevolent inhabitants. The navigator houses, with their third eyes, wield potent power, but none of them ever gave me the comfort that you do." Kasha's smile grew wry. "Maybe that's because I grew up in the Imperial Palace on Terra. The Emperor personally trained me. Among mortals, I'm the most powerful Psyker after the Emperor and Lord Micardo." Russ's eyebrow lifted. Primarchs were clever. He had to be careful not to give too much away. "Axis told me you consider yourself the third strongest Psyker in the Imperium," he said. "But that's not true. You're at least 22nd. Kasha laughed softly, then grew serious. She hadn't told Axis this. The Gene Seed Primarchs all carried some degree of psychic gift. Many of them had never awakened it. Leman Russ, for example, rarely used the power. These gifts could even grant glimpses of the future. She only smiled and kept silent. "You misunderstand," Kasha said after a moment. "When I said third, I meant among normal humans of the Imperium. Do you count the Gene Seed Primarchs as normal? Their genes are derived from the father, but they were tailored to extremes. They are giants, nearly superhuman. Some even have reproductive peculiarities. They cannot breed with ordinary human women. The continuation of the species depends on reproduction. A normal man can sire children, no matter how powerful. The Gene Seed Primarchs, though, are in many cases reproductively isolated. The Emperor did not castrate them. There simply were no women who could physiologically pair with them. I don't know precisely how the Gene Seed Primarchs were made. Much of it interfaced with the warp, but 21 of them possessed tremendous psychic potential. If they accepted the warp's essence, they could awaken power greater than Micardo's, perhaps second only to the Emperor. Russ's expression hardened. "Answer my question, girl." "Please don't call me girl, Lord Russ," Kasha said lightly. "By true age, I am older than you." Russ's face shifted into surprise. He had served the Imperium for 20 years and was not entirely ignorant. The Emperor and Micardo were publicly known immortals, yet there were other immortals who had publicly pledged to the Emperor during the Age of Strife. Immortals did not die of old age. Some had nearly indestructible bodies. "Consider me an immortal," Kasha said. "I don't have the Emperor's regeneration, but inheriting his genes granted me longevity. Axis and I are on our way to visit another brother, one of the Gene Seed Primarchs with exceptional psychic talent. You two might do well to meet. He lives on a world particularly receptive to the warp and has many Psykers." Russ nodded. It would not be simple to discover her true identity, but he too looked forward to meeting another mind touched by the father's hand. Meanwhile, Axis had already reached the Gloriana's hangar. 16 gold-armored custodian guards stood in immaculate formation. Captain Caesar stepped forward and saluted with solemn pride. "Axis, shield captain of the guard, please lead them safely," he intoned. Axis returned the salute with a smile. "Caesar and men, I wish you a safe journey." "We look forward to your return to Holy Terra to lead us again," Caesar said. The others echoed their assent. Axis nodded, then turned to the second Primarch and his gene seed sons. My sons, you board first. I have some business. The second Primarch waved his gene sons forward. Those Space Marines, having been conditioned, did not know Axis's true identity. To them, he was merely a custodian officer. 4 transport shuttles were filled with the Primarch's gene seed sons under custodian supervision and sent to a waiting destroyer. 1 shuttle remained docked, the last to take the second Primarch and 16 custodians. Lord Primarch, are you well? Axis asked politely. My body is much better, the second Primarch replied. If it were not for you, I would be dead and my legion would be no more. Despite his brief return, the Primarch had regained enough of his faculties to know what or who had preserved him. May I know your name? Axis asked. I have known you this whole time without knowing what to call you. Nicholas Carl. Call me Carl, the Primarch answered. Then, Lord Carl, I wish you a smooth voyage. I hope you will rebuild the Second Legion and join the Great Crusade in the Emperor's name, Axis said. Carl rose and spoke solemnly. Lord Axis, your aid saved me and my sons. I will never forget it. If ever you need help, so long as it does not involve betrayal of the Emperor, come to me. I will repay you. Axis felt an odd discomfort. I slaughtered over 90% of your sons, he admitted. Although they were controlled by Xenos, it was still a heavy thing. A Primarch's favor is not measured by that, Carl said. You will always be welcome. Then I will accept, Lord Nicholas Carl, Axis said with a small smile. Farewell, Lord Axis. I hope we fight side by side one day, Carl said, waving as the shuttle sealed. He boarded with his custodian guard and lifted off toward the cruiser. Axis stood on the hangar deck and watched the destroyer recede. A life with a new identity began now. No longer a custodian guard in name, but from this point forward a space marine of the Space Wolves. That night, a great feast was held in the Hall of the Space Wolves, all in Fenrisian style, thrown in Axis's honor. Axis, come taste this mead brewed for you, Russ called, lifting a massive horn of the strong drink. Kasha raised her own goblet beside him, grinning. Ha ha! I'm coming. Tonight we don't go home until we're drunk, Axis answered, and he joined them at the table. They drank, laughed, and celebrated until the stars outside the fortress temple blurred into the same warm haze as Kasha's psychic light, and the company reveled into stupor. Chapter 66, New Wolf Lord Axis. Fighting hundreds in a row. 5th update. Please subscribe. This drink is for you, Lord Axis. Welcome back to the Wolf Guard. A Space Wolves warrior from Fenris stood and raised his cup toward Axis. Ha ha! I remember you. You cooked for Russ and me during our eating contest. Axis answered, lifting his own goblet. When he and Russ had their contests, the tribal warriors of Fenris often cheered from the sidelines. That's right, Lord Axis. Carrying all that food nearly wore us out, slurred a drunken Space Wolves member. Do you still remember me, Lord Axis? I remember. I remember all of you. I remember life on Fenris. Every hunt, every contest, every lesson I taught, Axis replied warmly. He greeted the Wolf Lords and Lord Commanders present. Most of the Space Wolves were enthusiastic, though a few merely nodded. Those men weren't true Fenrisians. They came from the 6th Legion raised by the Emperor during the Holy Terra days and didn't share the savage customs of their homeworld. Lord Axis, he's the biggest eater on all Fenris, second only to the Wolf Father in strength, a tipsy warrior boasted, raising his cup. That's true. Even as a boy, his combat skill outstripped the tribal warriors, another added. Leman Russ, seated at the head of the table, smiled. The strongest among the Space Wolves now was not himself, but Axis, even if Axis hid his psychic might. That kind of raw chi was devastating. Axis hadn't even shown his full power yet. Then after his Astartes augmentation on Holy Terra, he must be even stronger, a discordant voice rang through the hall. The speaker called himself a Wolf Lord, but favored the title 7th Company Commander of the 6th Legion. Since the Primarch's return, names and ranks had shifted. Company commanders were styled Wolf Lords, the Primarch's guards were the Wolf Guard, the Emperor All-Father, the Primarch Wolf Father. That stands to reason. Even now, I believe Lord Axis is the strongest among us, besides the Wolf Father, said a former tribal member eagerly, and others began to shout praises of Axis's prowess. As a child of 6, he could chase down beasts on Fenris that would require dozens or hundreds to capture. Several older veterans remembered the small, long-tailed boy who once followed Russ before the Emperor took him away, until today. They expected that, after Astartes' augmentation, he would have to start at the bottom again. Wasn't this a chance to test him? Fighting was Fenrisian tradition. No one refused. Ha ha ha! Axis is my little wolf cub. The Emperor took him to Holy Terra. He received the Empire's finest training and the perfect Astartes modifications. In the Emperor's name, Axis will serve as a company commander, a wolf lord, Russ announced with a smile. The hall fell silent. Most had assumed Axis would have to rejoin as a basic recruit, even if he were the Wolf Father's adopted son. They had not expected Russ to appoint him directly as a Wolf Lord, by the Emperor's command. Great Wolf Father, isn't this against custom? One protested. That's right. Our 13 great companies already have Wolf Lords. We honor those positions. There's no vacancy. Another objected. The company Axis will lead will be reformed, the 14th Great Company of the Space Wolves. He will be our 14th Wolf Lord, Russ said. Each great company numbered several thousand. The Legion already totaled tens of thousands. It was time to expand. Even if a new company is formed, it should be chosen from current Wolf Guard. Axis just rejoined us. He should at least train a decade. Grumbled an old veteran who had been a space marine for 50 years, one of the recruits selected on Holy Terra. This is the Emperor's command, and Axis already has the combat power to justify it. We Space Wolves answer through strength. If any of you are unconvinced, challenge Axis now. If you defeat him, I'll make you the company commander of the 14th, Leman Russ declared. Fenrisians didn't suppress fights. They resolved grievances with them. Russ believed friendly combat could settle disputes, just as it once did between him and Horus. More practical still, Axis's recent deeds, donations of suits, ships, and his rescue of the second Primarch, spoke of merit, even if many of those events had been erased from memory. Who else could have done such things? If proof were needed, let combat decide. No problem. If anyone doubts the claim to the 14th Company Commander, the 14th Wolf Lord, then bring it, Axis said, setting down a meat leg and clapping his hands. He understood Russ wanted him to establish his prestige within the pack. He intended to oblige. Then I'll go first. A Space Wolves warrior rose and moved to the center, beckoning Axis. Axis smiled. One of you isn't enough. All who doubt, stand forward now. However many you are, come at once. Ha! Axis is right. If you're unconvinced, come all at once. If you beat him, the Wolf Lord's seat is yours. Russ laughed, slamming his cup on the table. I'll go. Me too. Lord Axis, let us witness your power. In an instant, more than 100 elite veterans stepped into the hall. Unarmored, they formed a ring, muscles tense, war spirits high, and the smell of ale thick in the air. Leman Russ and the Fenrisians beat the tables like war drums. Axis rolled his shoulders, a wild gleam in his eyes. Come on, brothers, he growled, voice booming like thunder. A 2.3-meter-tall wolf veteran lunged first, roaring as he swung a fist at Axis's face. Axis sidestepped and answered with a rocketing uppercut that struck the veteran's chin. Bang! The giant flew backward and crashed several meters away, out cold from the knockout. The hall erupted, one blow, and he was down. Seeing their teammate felled, several warriors attacked at once. Axis blurred, appearing among them in the blink of an eye. His right leg whipped low like a steel whip, sweeping several veterans off their feet in succession. He caught a punch with his left hand, twisted, and slammed the attacker to the ground. A right elbow cracked into another's ribs. The man doubled over, retching. Two more came from the sides. One seized his waist while the other aimed a blow at his temple. Axis sneered and clamped his left arm around the waist-grabber's neck like an iron vice, hoisting him up and using him as a human shield. The other's heavy punch connected with his brother's face, nasal bone shattered, blood spattered. Then Axis's whip kick swept in. With the crisp snap of breaking ribs, the attacker went airborne and crashed down like a broken kite. 5 more veterans surged to overwhelm him. Axis laughed and unleashed a storm of strikes. They had no time to parry. Punches landed in rapid succession, cheekbones splintering, faces contorting, and one by one they staggered and collapsed. In an instant, 5 more lay out cold around him. Chapter 67, Young Wolf Lord, Kassa's Night Raid. Subscribe. Everyone was stunned by Axis's strength. In an instant, more than a dozen Space Wolves were down. Because the fight had only just begun, The wolves attacked in waves rather than all at once, yet each wave was broken and thrown aside by Axis. Bang, bang, bang. Roars and the pounding of drinking horns filled the hall. Around the tables, the wolves who watched raised their horns and beat the tabletops in time, led by Russ himself. "I told you, if you don't all come at once, you've no chance," Axis said with a cold snort, arms folded. His arrogance made people want to punch him. "Damn it, everyone, attack!" someone shouted. "All together, teach this brat a lesson," another bellowed. More wolf warriors poured into the melee. Over 80 charged at once, then more joined until nearly 300 were attacking. Kasha raised a cup and cheered on the spectacle. There was a certain savage pleasure in watching men brawl. Russ slapped the table and laughed. This was life on Fenris. "For Russ," the wolves cried, raising their horns. Axis moved through them like a shadow, striking with brutal, precise force. A knee shattered a rib. A back elbow sent a warrior reeling. He grabbed one man by the hair and smashed his head against his own knee, the sickening crack of a broken nose bridge splattering blood on combat boots. The hall echoed with the sounds of bodies hitting the floor and the shouts of fighters. Axis fought harder and harder, covered in other people's blood, none of it his own. He didn't even bother using ki. His speed was lightning fast and his power crushing, and with every blow a veteran fell. What began as a decisively lopsided fight grew even more so. Dozens more wolves who had been drinking at the tables could no longer stand it. They hurled their horns aside and charged. The number in the ring swelled to 200, 300, then kept climbing. By the end of the hour, Axis stood alone in the center of the hold, while piles of space wolves lay motionless around him, over 1,000 by rough count. Mortal sailors and Imperial Navy personnel watched from a distance, horrified and awed. A swarm of giants laid out in the ship's hold, an unforgettable sight. "Axis! Axis!" the crowd chanted. To have bested so many single-handedly, that was a feat even their great father Russ could scarcely match. "Stop gawking and help carry them away," Russ shouted, waving the mortal crew in. The ship's auxiliary forces, sailors and medics, cautiously entered and began lifting the hulking space wolves onto stretchers. The apothecaries would be busy through the night. There might not even be enough beds. It didn't much matter. Axis had shown restraint. Most injuries were superficial bruises and broken bones that, with a Space Marine's healing, would be right in a couple of days. "Ha ha! Still unconvinced? Is anyone here still doubting Axis should be Wolf Lord, commander of the 14th Great Company?" Russ stood and scanned the assembled wolves. Tonight had settled the matter. Axis was now the strongest among them after Russ himself. "To Lord Axis," the crowd roared, rising and raising their horns. Axis smiled faintly, walked through the throng, took a cup of mead, and drained it. The injured were borne away, and the revelry resumed. The banquet rolled on through night and day for nearly 3 full days, as wolves took turns toasting their new champion. Some of the lightly wounded returned from the medbay and rejoined the feasts. By the third night, the celebration finally dwindled. Even Axis, gifted with the terrifying constitution of a scion, was dizzy from constant drinking. Tens of thousands of voices had toasted him. He no longer remembered how much he had drunk. 2 steadier wolves supported the swaying Axis to the door of the sleeping quarters. "Rest well, Lord of Wolves," one slurred. "We'll pick soldiers for you from the new recruits in a bit." Axis gave a lazy smile, then let out a thunderous belch that filled the room with the heavy smell of mead. "All right, you two can go. Leave him to me. I'll look after Axis," Kasha said with a knowing smile. The 2 men, equally drunk, nodded and stumbled away. Axis collapsed onto the bunk and snored, a fluffy tail wagging behind him. Kasha sat and absent-mindedly stroked the thick, prickly tail. Axis suddenly stiffened. One of the scion weaknesses was the tail. If gripped, the scion went rigid and helpless. The weakness could be trained away, but Axis had not yet completed that training. Seeing his body lock up, Kasha realized she'd uncovered something vital. No wonder he always kept his tail wrapped around his waist. "Axis, are you asleep?" she asked, leaning over him. "Ugh, woo." Axis burped and buried his face in the pillow, unmoved. Kasha patted him to be sure. When she confirmed he was out cold, she tiptoed to the door and quietly locked it from the inside. Then she slipped into the bathroom for a long hot shower to wash away the smell of wine. "You stinky boy," she muttered as she emerged in a bathrobe. Tonight this old woman is going to succeed. She leaned back over Axis. How about a little game? You hand over your gene seed. Axis mumbled incoherently in his stupor, brain fogged after 3 days of drinking. All right then, she said, grinning. Best 2 out of 3. I'll pick my champion first. What followed was a strange, delicious duel, Axis's drunken, reflexive instincts against Kasha's cunning. He took first blood in the bot lane and pushed down a mid-lane tower. He stole her red buff in the jungle. Kasha countered, killing Axis on the high ground to hold the top, then snuck into the river and took a small dragon. She thought she could steal the Baron and win in one stroke, but Axis hit the Baron pit, countered, and sent her back to the fountain. With the Baron buff, he smashed down Kasha's mid-second tower, seized the high ground, and then charged at her Nexus defenses. Kasha scrambled to defend the 2 Nexus towers, but against overwhelming force resistance was useless. The outer high ground defenses fell first, then the 2 Nexus towers. Kasha's crystal exploded in a cascade of fireworks. The duel was over. Early the next morning, Axis blinked awake. Golden hair framed a soft face near his, and a faint perfume hung in the air. A girl lay curled against him, warm and breathing. The smooth feel of her skin told him this was no dream. Ah! Damn, Slaanesh, how dare you! Axis muttered inwardly. Boys had to be careful when they went out. Slaanesh, seduction, so many dangers. Don't make a fuss, Kasha said, pushing lightly. You're squashing my hair. Sleeping. Why are you in my room? Axis asked, still groggy. To get your gene seed, of course, Kasha said as she opened her eyes and smiled. Chapter 68. I am the Emperor's daughter. Warpstorm. Please subscribe. Axis jerked upright, a hangover pounding at his skull and memories knotting together in a dull, confused jumble. He glanced down at himself and then at Kasha beside him, her golden hair fanned over the pillow, a lazy hand propping her chin as she smiled like she'd won something. He rubbed his temples, baffled. Why was she doing all this? Taking his gene seed? Ridiculous. He didn't even have anything like that. And even if she became pregnant, any hybrid wouldn't inherit his ki. At best, it would make a stronger custodian. Saiyans without ki weren't inherently so dangerous. He wasn't even sure Great Ape or Super Saiyan forms would persist without their Kai support. It was all so pointless. Why are you doing this, Kasha? Axis asked. She sat up and met his stare. Axis, I want your protection. I don't feel safe. You can give me that security. Axis rubbed his temples again. His Saiyan body fought off the alcohol quickly, and fragments of last night came back into focus. The bathrobe, the scrambling, and that damned tail. It clicked. You grabbed my tail? Kasha spread her hands in mock innocence. Who knew your weakness would be so cute? One touch and you went limp. Then you were completely at my mercy. Axis closed his eyes for a beat. The tail was a weakness a Saiyan could train away. He'd have to work on that, lifting weights with it, enduring being grabbed until it stopped having an effect. He drew a long breath and fixed his black pupils on her. Listen, Kasha, I don't care whether you really need protection or have other motives, but today you went too far. If you needed help, you could have asked. As a companion, I'd have helped you. Kasha's expression softened. I do have secrets, but trust me, it's better you don't know them now. You're not ready. That's not a good reason to manipulate me, Axis said. Everyone has secrets, Kasha. If you need me, tell me plainly. She tilted her head, then leaned in a little, eyes earnest. I can keep secrets for you. I'll tell you mine, if you can keep it. The words hit him like a chill. He sensed a golden aura of psychic power shimmering around her. This has something to do with the Emperor, doesn't it? Kasha nodded. I am the Emperor's daughter, the daughter he imprisoned for 100 years. Axis's surprise was immediate. Imprisoned a century and still looking 18 or 19? Could she be a female Primarch? You're also a Primarch? He blurted. She rolled her eyes. I was born in the normal way, not like those Primarchs he created. There are fundamental differences you need to understand. A normally born daughter? Then why imprison you? How can you live so long? Axis demanded. I inherited the Emperor's immortal gene. As long as I'm not killed, my body won't age. As for why I was locked away, that's a story I can't tell you. For your own good, Kasha said, shaking her head. She and her mother had scattered the gene seed Primarchs across the galaxy. That was an absolute Imperium secret and a bottom line for her father. Axis knowing she was the Emperor's daughter was one thing, but if he learned she and her mother had been involved in dispersing the gene seed Primarchs, it could cause irreparable trouble. Axis narrowed his eyes. A psyker and the Emperor's daughter, cruelly imprisoned by her own father, could she have colluded with chaos? He thought of what he knew as a transmigrator. The Emperor once had a companion named Erda who betrayed him, banishing crafted Primarchs into warp storms and scattering them across the galaxy. That betrayal had forced the Emperor to search for them during the Great Crusade and had indirectly led to the tragic fates of some Primarchs. Could Kasha be tied to that? If she'd been a traitor, the Emperor wouldn't have left her alive. He wouldn't have allowed her psychic powers to remain untainted. The Emperor's intolerance for chaos was absolute. There were other clues. When the Custodes had been sent away, Kasha had been almost relieved. She disliked them. He remembered that her Gaolers had been a secret faction of the Custodes, the black-armored Custodes who had watched over her in the dungeon under Holy Terra. Axis made his decision. I understand, Kasha. This is your secret, and I won't pry. I'll keep your identity as the Emperor's daughter safe. She visibly relaxed and let out a relieved sigh. Thank you, Axis. I'll be your greatest asset. Just stay by my side from now on. Axis felt that proposing marriage or pledging eternal bonds would be premature. They'd only known each other a few months, and both of their lifespans were long. There was time. Before he could say more, the ship's alarms blared across the Gloriana-class battleship. The voice of the pilot bridge boomed through the compartment systems. Small-scale warp storm detected. All mortal sailors and crew are to remain in their cabins. No one is permitted outside during warp travel. All Space Marines are to immediately enter the corridors and eliminate all enemies. Warp travel always carried the remote risk of a warp storm. Even with a Geller field, some warp entities could seep into a ship. It was rare, but it happened. On his previous voyage aboard the cruiser, Axis had stayed in his cabin and the training room. That trip had been clean. This time, they would not be so lucky. Kasha sprang from the bed, quickly dressed and scooping up her psychic staff. We have work to do. Get ready for battle. I'll explain as we go, she told him. This was a good chance for Axis to see what the warp natives looked like. It was also a task her father had given her. Axis nodded and pulled on his modified, form-fitting combat suit. He usually wore it aboard ship for comfort and protection. He saved power armor for outside operations. While studying with Micardo in the Imperial Palace on Terra, he'd learned the theory of warp travel, though Micardo hadn't dwelt on the daemons, merely warned that some entities might slip in and needed to be purged. As a transmigrator, Axis already knew more. The warp housed forces like Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh. He felt a momentary guilty twinge. After what had happened with Kasha last night, he hoped they wouldn't draw the attention of Slaanesh. Stop daydreaming and get ready. Kasha's voice was sharp. You're about to meet the warp's true inhabitants, Chaos Daemons. They stepped out into a corridor already filled with Space Wolves Marines manning weapons. The assembled warriors nodded as Axis appeared. Axis, Wolflord, why aren't you in power armor? These entities are dangerous, a Space Wolves warrior grunted. Without power armor, even a Marine could be badly wounded or worse by a daemon. It's fine, Axis said. I can handle them even without power armor, Mount, and Kasha is a powerful psyker. She'll keep us safe. No sooner had he spoken than a purple-pink wash of energy rolled through the compartment, and a woman's laughter, high, delighted, and terribly seductive, echoed through the hull. Hee! The sound carried a texture of pleasure and temptation that made the hairs on everyone's neck stand up. Kasha's brows tightened. She planted her staff, and a golden psychic barrier flared to life around the gathered Marines, throwing back the strange energy with a humming, shimmering wall. Chapter 69, Warp Demon, Slaanesh, Khorne. A golden ward of energy blossomed around Axis and the nearest Space Wolves, shielding them from the maddening laughter that washed over the ship. The moment Kasha heard that sound, she knew exactly what kind of warp entity was approaching. There are 5 kinds of warp demons, she said under her breath as she swept her psychic senses. Khornes, rage, war, blood. Nurgles, pestilence, decay, contagion. Tzeentches, change, sorcery, schemes. Slaaneshes, lust, pleasure, ecstasy. and those of Chaos Undivided without a single attribute. Chaos Undivided are the easiest to handle. Nurgle and Slaanesh are the worst. Nurgle brings plagues no human medicine can touch, and Slaanesh lures you with illusions. See one and it becomes the thing you most desire. Then it will tear you apart, enjoying both your pleasure and your pain. Tzeentch is best fought by powerful psychers, otherwise the ship is at risk of corruption. These warp entities can scramble the mind. Be careful, Lord of Wolves. Kasha's voice was low, urgent. Axis nodded and relaxed into his chi. A green protective field sprang up in front of them, overlaying the psychic ward. Then the demon stepped through. It was a thing of impossible dissonance. Cloven hooves, purplish-red skin, a crown of horns, and a long, lolling tongue. 6 arms ended in hands, each with 6 fingers. Its body combined male and female traits. On one side a woman's breast, on the other a male chest. One thigh was thick and muscle-bound, the other narrow and smooth. It wore a gauzy purple skirt, a figure at once lithe and bulky. It carried a mismatched arsenal, a forked trident, a whip, a scimitar of unfamiliar shape, a spiked blade. It rose to about 3 meters tall and exuded a revolting, seductive presence. "Bow before the Prince of Pleasure," it crooned. "Mortals, I will grant you ultimate ecstasy." "Greater Slaanesh demon," Kasha warned. "Everyone, be careful." Axis snorted. A white light shimmered in his palm, and he sent a qigong wave straight at the thing. The demon didn't finish its sentence. The blast tore through it, blowing away half its body. Axis unleashed a few more waves, and the hermaphroditic horror was pulverized, its semblance shattered in white energy. "A dead hermaphrodite. Disgusting," Axis muttered. Kasha stared. She had intended to use the demon as a lesson, showing Axis its allure and weaknesses, but he had destroyed it with a gesture. She reminded herself that warp creatures can't always be truly killed by mundane force. Without special means, their essence often reforms in the warp. Still, the immediate threat was ended. "Well done, Lord of Wolves," one of the Space Marines called, giving Axis a thumbs up. As warriors raised on Fenris, the Wolves had seen Axis's key in action and approved. "We need to split up. More demons could be elsewhere," another Space Wolf said. Slaanesh and Nurgle's minions were the deadliest to ordinary mortals. Where Slaanesh tempted and then tormented, Nurgle brought diseases no human medicine could touch. The wolves fanned out with bolters, Leman Russ at their head, Frost chainsword in hand, cleaving through demonic forms. "Wolves! Eliminate these invaders, purge the warp filth!" Russ roared. The demons on the ship were cut down one by one, and the Gloriana-class battleship's Gellerfield finally spun up to full strength, holding the warp entities at bay. Even so, hundreds of mortal sailors and Imperial troops had already fallen in the initial invasion. Space Marines could handle such things, but ordinary mortals had almost no defense. "Be careful, Axis. Slaanesh will tempt you, signal pleasures aimed at your deepest desires. But it's all a facade. Their true form is repulsive. They're sadists who revel in turning pleasure into pain," Kasha said as they moved together, explaining the Slaaneshic methods. "I know. I'll be careful," Axis said, eyes on the corridors as he kept his chi flowing and the psychic shield active. His internal brain core, a product of the Emperor's modifications, helped him resist the illusionary tug of the warp. His qigong waves smashed apart any Slaanesh spawn that tried to approach. This looked like a small, localized incursion. Only a handful of Slaaneshi entities had slipped through. No sooner had Axis thought so than the ship shuddered. Red alarms began to scream. "Report, Geller Array Number 4 has malfunctioned," a Mechanicus tech priest announced over the ship-wide channel. "Who is closest to Array 4? Get there and escort a tech priest," Russ barked. Axis checked the schematic. His team was closest. "I am nearest to Array 4. Send the tech priest and I'll escort them to the array," he said into the comm. "Understood. We will route a tech priest to you," Russ replied. He had seen warp storms many times in his long life. Demon incursions were rare on a ship of this size, but when they happened, the priority was swift extermination and then escape from the storm. The Navigator House members were pushing the ship to edge out of the warp as fast as they could. Axis and Kasha moved to the coordinates. As they ran, the atmosphere changed. A new, blood-red mist began to creep through the corridors, distinct from the earlier purple haze. It pressed on Axis like a weight, and buried anger flared up from deep inside him. A chorus of savage roars echoed, and shapes poured from the shadows. Countless Khorne demons, all brutal, war-loving maniacs. They ignored mortal crew and lunged for the nearest Slaanesh demons. "These ones are easier," Kasha warned as she kept stride. "They're pure bloodlust, Khorne's spawn. Kill them, and they won't tempt you. Slaanesh and Khorne naturally fight each other. They will clash on sight." Axis's hand rested on his chest. He focused on steadying his breath, tamping down the rising fury. He amplified his chi to clear his mind while his modified brain core whirred, a cold anchor against Khorne's pull. Khorne's power hit Scions hard. Without the Emperor's surgical changes, a normal Scion crossing into this universe might be consumed by bloodlust and raised up as a chosen of Khorne. "Axis, breathe. Suppress the anger," Kasha said and sent out a wash of golden psychic energy. The red mist around them thinned as her power countered the bloodlust haze. Together, they pressed onward, escorting the tech priest into the heart of the ship to restore the Gellar array and push the battleship out of the warp-stormed region before the demons could reorganize. The influence of Slaanesh on Axis was almost non-existent. His temperament leaned toward battle, so Khorne held the greatest sway over him. Before Axis had met them, the Emperor had warned him of his condition. At his core burned a terrifying rage, and he needed to learn to control it, or it would be exploited by the forces of chaos. The Emperor and Micardo had both insisted on mental training. "Are you all right, Axis? If you're not, you can stay here and rest." "I can escort the tech priest to repair the Gellar field array," Kasha said, genuinely concerned. "Don't worry, Kasha. I've calmed down. I'm fine," Axis replied, nodding. That flash of fury hadn't been enough to make him lose control. He ran his qigong through his mind, and clarity returned to his thoughts. The Emperor had reinforced his brain and installed a special control core to help manage his anger, and Axis's qigong could resist warp erosion to a degree. Kasha's golden psychic power, unusually close to the Emperor's among mortal psychers, would also help him resist Chaos's influence. "Then let's move on. If we meet demons, don't intervene. Let me handle them. Reducing combat exposure will help you control your rage," Kasha advised. "I'm not as fragile as you think," Axis said. "That blood-red aura made me uneasy, but it's a long way from me losing control." They pressed on. Along the way, they fought through waves of purple and red daemons. Axis was silent, channeling qigong waves that blasted the creatures apart. Kasha wove a golden psychic shield over him. Axis's strikes tore demons to shreds. Any target hit by his power was reduced to fragments with no chance to fight back. After a few minutes, 2 space wolves arrived, escorting a red-robed tech priest whose body bristled with bionic arms. "Omnissiah, preserve us. Please escort me quickly to repair the Gellar field generators. The sooner they're fixed, the sooner we escape," the tech priest said. The space wolves saluted Axis. "Follow me. You two stay close to the tech priest. Leave everything else to me," Axis replied, and he led them to the malfunctioning generator. "As you go in, beware. There are 2 types of warp entities aboard this time," Kasha warned quietly as they walked. "The blood-red ones stir anger and bloodlust. The purple and pink ones play on desire. Stay within the psychic shield and don't let them affect you." "We trained against this before we became full warriors. We won't be taken," the 2 space wolves answered. They met little real resistance. The demons Axis faced were like cannon fodder. Whether hulking Khorne fiends or the lithe, seductive emissaries of Slaanesh, none could withstand his assaults. Each time Axis struck, Kasha cleared the wreckage away with her golden powers. When they reached the generator chamber, the tech priest stepped inside and set to work. "Keep this area secure while I concentrate," he warned, unfolding tools. Mechanical tentacles like an octopus extended from his carapace as he began repairs. Axis positioned himself at the front, Kasha behind him with her staff supporting the psychic barrier, and the 2 space wolves flanking the tech priest. Zzzt! Boom! Bang! Qigong waves flashed from Axis's palms, cutting down demons that tried to swarm the room. The space wolves fired bolters and the energy weapons Axis had provided, powerful arms that, while effective, were too dangerous to use at full strength inside a ship for fear of structural damage. The invaders tried to coordinate, lower demons attacking under higher ones' command, but they never breached Axis's iron line. He was a mobile artillery platform. Inside the vessel, he tempered himself, knowing one full release could tear the ship apart. About half an hour later, reinforcements arrived, several Space Wolf squads and another tech priest. With both tech priests working in tandem, the Geller field array was soon repaired. The field sprang to life and erected a true universe barrier that isolated the warp entities. Under the guidance of the Imperial navigators, Leman Russ's fleet had already threaded out of the small warp storm into a safe position. The immediate threat of warp incursions ended. The fleet had escaped. All right, the Geller field is restored. Now we just need to clear the warp entities from the remaining compartments, one tech priest said. Escort the tech priest back to the safe zone, Axis ordered. Kasha and I will continue sweeping the rest. The Space Wolves and accompanying Imperial ships tidied up their vessels, and the other destroyers, cruisers, and frigates with the Gloriana-class battleship did the same. A few hours later, Axis and Kasha returned to the Glory Queen's command center, where Lord Leman Russ stood on the bridge. Report, Russ demanded. Our fleet has exited the warp storm zone. All warp entities aboard the ships have been destroyed. Our fleet is safe, a mortal officer reported. What of losses or ships lost in the warp? Russ pressed. In a storm, such things could happen in an instant. All ships are accounted for, Lord Russ, even the smallest sword-class frigate, the officer answered, and casualties. On your flagship, over 500 sailors and 400 Imperial Navy crew were killed. A dozen Space Wolves were wounded, but none slain. Other ships are still compiling figures, the officer replied. I understand, Russ said. Notify every captain and navigator to exercise caution. Treat the dead and tend the wounded immediately. I do not want this to repeat. Aye, the officer replied, and the ship's navigator opened psychic channels to contact the fleet. With orders issued and the work distributed, Russ relaxed slightly and Axis stepped forward. Commanding a flagship is harder than I thought, Axis said, half amused. You've done well, Axis. I heard you cut down a lot of demons, Russ said. Many Space Wolves and mortal crew had seen Axis's Qigong in action up close. They weren't particularly strong against me, Axis admitted. For you perhaps, but not for most, Russ chuckled. When you travel through the warp, this happens often. My ship was luckier than many. Other vessels' Geller fields aren't as robust. Encounters like this are common. I hope the Emperor can develop our human FTL tech quickly, Axis said. He wondered how the Emperor's work on the ship design he'd provided was progressing. Bulma's father in the Dragon Ball world had managed miraculous advances in a few months. If Bulma and her father existed in the Dragon Ball universe, they would be nothing less than incarnations of the Omnissiah. Black technologies would pour forth endlessly, time machines that return you to the past, gateways into parallel universes. It had been more than 20 years since the Emperor acquired the hyperspace engine, and Axis wondered what had become of it. I wish it were faster, Russ said with a helpless sigh. But it's not as simple as you think. I discussed this with my father last time. With the science humanity has now, we can't just copy the hyperspace engine. It'll take at least a few hundred more years. The hyperspace engine's technology was far beyond current human understanding, a whole different theory, an independent operating system. Fully comprehending it was a daunting task. Apart from trying to recover the Gene Seed Primarch, the Emperor had thrown most of his efforts into studying it. And that was only part of the problem. Axis's little ship had a hyperspace engine, but it was only suitable for small craft. Scaling it up for capital ships would require massive improvements. On the command bridge, all the mortals had been cleared out. Even some Space Wolves had left. Very few people knew the truth about the engine. In the entire Imperium, only the Custodes, Micardo, the Emperor, Russ, and Axis knew. Kasha had to be added now that she was the Emperor's daughter. Why hasn't the Emperor recruited top human scientists or high-ranking magi from the Mechanicum? Surely more minds would speed things up, Axis asked. Human technology had regressed so much. If humanity in the Golden Age had had this engine, they might already have replicated it. The hyperspace engine is the Imperium's deepest secret, Axis. If you and I hadn't found it and contributed it, Russ trailed off. We wouldn't even be supposed to know any of this. Among all the brothers, only I know the full details. Horus doesn't. In that case, it's even harder to gather many researchers. Only the Emperor and Micardo can be trusted with this. Russ shrugged. The Emperor was cautious to a fault, but in the Warhammer universe, you could not be otherwise. There were too many monsters and daemons, each one ready to seize power and technology for itself. How much longer until we reach Prospero? Axis asked. About a month. Once we can talk to Magnus for a month, we'll embark on the Great Crusade, Russ said. Father, what's the head count for my great company? And what about arms and armor? Axis asked. Although the Emperor had gifted him the Custodes Aquilon Terminator plate and a power fist, the golden armor was too conspicuous to wear among Space Marines. He still needed a set of transitional gear, more in keeping with a Space Marine captain. I'll prepare a Cataphracti Terminator suit for you, with a power axe and a chainsword, Russ said. Axis rarely depended on weapons. Most foes fell to a single Qigong wave, but formal equipment mattered. A regular power suit would suffice. I don't need a Cataphracti model. If necessary, I can modify the Aquilon suit the Emperor gave me, Axis replied. Forget that. Cataphracti it is. A Wolf Lord's prestige must be maintained. Russ smiled. Your provisional muster is 1,000. They'll be trained on Fenris and report to you after completion. I'll prepare armor and weapons for them and assign you a large destroyer. What class do you want? For context, whether in the Great Crusade or the 40K era, the Space Wolves normally had 13 great companies. After Axis joins, he will be the 14th. During the Great Crusade, great companies numbered over 1,000 men. By the 40K era, they were reduced to 300 plus. Axis didn't hesitate. Give me an Avenger-class cruiser. An Avenger-class measured 7.5 kilometers long, roughly 1.8 kilometers across, massing about 40 megatons and able to hold 140,000 crew. You've got nerve asking for an Avenger, Russ said, but fine. I'll also equip you with 2 sword-class frigates. Thank you, Father. How long until personnel and equipment are in place? Selection and training of recruits takes years, though the next batch is arriving soon. I can allocate all of them to you for now, a few hundred men who were meant to bolster other companies. As for an Avenger, I'll place an order with Mars. It'll take more than 10 years to build, depending on the situation there. More than 10 years. That's slow. Are there no ready-made Avengers? If you want a new one, Mars must build it. If you want an existing vessel, I can inquire. Perhaps a Dauntless class, or a Lunar class, or smaller. Building an Avenger in under 10 years is already fast. A large cruiser also needs a navigator and a Lingyuje. Get me an old ship for now, Father. I'll wait for the new Avenger for the future. Axis wanted both, a ship to sail now and one he could modify later. When the new one is built, add a larger food storage hold and a special training hall. Reduce the crew complement where possible. Hold on. Russ summoned a Mechanicus tech priest. A few minutes later, a red-cloaked tech priest entered the commander's suite. Omnissiah, Lord Russ. What are your orders? The tech priest intoned. It's like this, Russ said. Axis has been appointed by the Emperor as captain of the Space Wolves' 14th Great Company. The company needs a ship. I want Mars to build an Avenger-class cruiser. I understand, Lord Russ. I will have the Lingyuje contact Mechanicum headquarters on Mars and place the order. The tech priest's voice was steady. Construction of an Avenger-class cruiser will take roughly 12 years. Delivery will be after that. Add a large training deck and substantially increased food stores, Russ said. I will report those specifications, the tech priest replied. Lord Russ, any other instructions? Yes. Do you have any cruisers that can be reallocated now? Russ asked. There is an available ship, the tech priest said. It's a Dauntless-class cruiser, formerly of the 2nd Legion. After the 2nd Legion's destruction, their remaining vessels were divided. The Dauntless is currently in our fleet and can be reassigned. Axis, take the Dauntless for now, Russ said. Agreed. Axis smiled. I'll arrange it immediately and notify the Imperial Navy. The sailors and naval personnel aboard the Dauntless will be incorporated into the Space Wolves, the tech priest said, then turned and left. Russ chuckled. You rascal, satisfied now? A Dauntless and an Avenger. Your appetite is large. Ha ha ha, it'll be worth it, Father. In a couple of days, gather the Space Wolves. Time to use Qi to strengthen their bodies, Axis said, laughing. Good. In a couple of days, we'll start using your Qi to strengthen the Wolf Guard, Russ said, looking at Kasha. Kasha, I need to talk to Axis about something. You can head back first. He intended to discuss the two cultivators with Axis, and it was better not to have outsiders present. Kasha smiled faintly at him, nodded to Russ and Axis, and moved to leave, but Axis caught her hand. "It's fine. You can know what's coming," Axis said. They were already lovers. Keeping more secrets between them felt unnecessary. Besides, Kasha had already entrusted him with her biggest secret. She was the Emperor's daughter. Axis had no intention of hiding the cultivators from her. In fact, when they planted cultivators in the future, they might even be able to use psychic power to strengthen them, and the Emperor's psychic power was the ideal source. The Emperor's psychic energy carried potent holy attributes and was particularly devastating to warp creatures. If the cultivators could tap into it, all the better. Once Huang Laohan took his seat on the Golden Throne, the living saints might be able to mobilize some of that power as well, but for now, only Kasha possessed it. Russ laughed and waved a hand. "Looks like this girl has taken you, or you've taken her," he teased, looking at Axis. Axis's mouth twitched. Being claimed by a woman a century or two older than him was mildly embarrassing. "I was taken by Axis," Kasha said lightly. "He drank too much that night." She smiled, diffusing the moment. Axis gave a brief rundown of the cultivators. "Russ and I have been cultivating beings that can use ki. They're somewhere between plant and animal and have considerable combat potential. I'll introduce the two to you in a minute." "Can use ki? Between plant and animal?" "That sounds like orc," Kasha blurted. As the Emperor's daughter, she had heard her father speak of many strange races. Orc were infamous, hard to kill, partly plant-like, able to reproduce rapidly. From what she'd been told, they were disturbingly similar to the cultivators. "They are similar in a way," Axis admitted, "but they're far more powerful than orc." Kasha nodded, but couldn't help wondering where Axis had found such creatures. Russ spoke up. "The first cultivator needs to be hidden. Its appearance is clearly alien. The second, Do can pass. He's subhuman." Do was 2 meters tall, light green-skinned, pointed ears, otherwise almost human. Russ had taken blood from the fellow and had his ship's apothecaries analyze it. They concluded he was over 60% human, with the rest of his makeup resembling plant lineages, a typical Imperial mutant subhuman. "Fine," Kasha said. "But Russ, how will you explain Do-O's origin? He can use ki, people will connect that to Axis, and he's also, to some extent, a gene seed offspring of Leman Russ." Russ waved away the concern. "Not a problem. My Wolf Guard keeps secrets. They won't ask." Axis shook his head. "No, we must keep Do a secret. Ordinary Wolf Guard can't know. Too many people talk." Russ had unconditional trust in his gene seed sons, but Axis remembered how things could go wrong. The Emperor had just reclaimed the Golden Throne and ordered Russ to bring Magnus back. During the war in Prospero, Russ had originally sent envoys to persuade the Thousand Sons to surrender. But a traitor who said nothing but lies caused the Thousand Sons to receive the wrong information, instigated the war, and led to Prospero's tragedy. Little Magnus's defection remained one of the most bitter lessons. That figure, much like Erebus, a chaos agent, showed how a handful of traitors could ruin everything. "Axis, do you mean to hide both cultivators? If so, how will we get ki to them?" Russ asked. "The ki is transmitted by touch, so they don't need to be seen," Axis explained. "I've already got a plan. While I'm on this ship, I'll strengthen the Space Wolves directly. When I go back to my own ship, Do-O will continue the work, but disguised. For example, Do-O can be hidden inside a machine that emits ki. The Wolf Guard will touch the device and feel the ki flow into them. But then how do we explain the origin of the ki to the Space Wolves when you're not present?" Russ pressed. "You won't even be here." "It's simple," Axis said. "We'll say I've stored a large reserve of ki inside a special device. That device releases ki to strengthen the Wolf Guard. That way Do can operate behind the scenes, and even the first cultivator can be used without anyone seeing them." Russ nodded. "All right, do it your way." After that, they brought Kasha to meet the 2 green cultivators. When the creatures addressed Axis as master, Kasha went pale. "Axis, you should learn about orc," she said. "These 2 look exactly like orc. Are you sure you didn't make them from orc cells?" Their colors were identical. The reproduction methods, the tone, Kasha found it hard to believe they weren't orc. Axis laughed and suddenly bellowed, "Whack!" Kasha stared. "What?" "How was that? Do I sound like them?" Axis grinned and shouted again, "Wah!" The two cultivators immediately copied their master and gave a thunderous, triumphant wag. The roar seemed to fill their own bodies with power, an invigorating surge. Hearing the three of them, Kasha felt dizzy. "Don't take it so seriously," Axis said, chuckling. "This isn't funny," Kasha snapped. "Orc are terrifying. You studied with Prime Minister Micardo. You know the galaxy's dangerous species, and orc are one of the greatest scourges. When they arrive on a planet, it's a disaster. Even killing them isn't enough. Their corpses spawn mushrooms, which grow grots, squigs, and more orc. The biggest squigs reach over 10 meters and can challenge small titans. Planets infested by orc are basically lost. Exterminatus is the only answer. They evolve monstrously fast in war. On day 1, they fight with stones and sticks. Day 2 with blades. Day 3, they might have gunpowder. And day 4, you'd better hope they haven't learned how to use your guns. Anything left on a battlefield can be turned into a weapon by them." Kasha felt she had to make Axis understand just how dangerous orc were. "Please, don't experiment on them. My father warned me about this." "They're not orc," Axis said with a helpless smile. "They're cultivators from the Dragon Ball world. Yes, they're green and plant-like, but they are a different species." "Good," Kasha said, relieved. "Don't go near orc." Axis reassured her. He understood orc better than most in the galaxy. They were not a natural species, but creations of the Old Ones, engineered as a war race to fight the Necrons and the Star Gods. The Old Ones were defeated in the War in Heaven before they could install proper control systems, and the orc broke free, happy, loud, and forever whacking across the stars. In the Handband King's collection room, there was an ancient Krork, 12 meters tall, with power comparable to a gene seed Primarch, one of the many terrible relics of those wars. Kasha listened, still uneasy, while Axis and Russ continued to plan. The cultivators stood by, alert and awaiting orders, their green skin gleaming under the chamber lights. The discussion turned back toward logistics and secrecy, how to channel Ki into the Wolfguard, how to hide Du-O, and how to keep knowledge of these beings from spreading. The galaxy contained enough real horrors, none of them wanted to add another. Chapter 73. How powerful is the Emperor's psionic energy? Chi and Soul Orcs in the current galaxy are nothing short of a natural disaster. Whether it was the Orc warboss in the future Ullanor Crusade who nearly wounded the Emperor, or the Beast from the Beast Arises era that could have killed Vulcan, Lord of the Fire Drakes, orcs evolve terrifyingly fast. Given time and opportunity, they can reach Primarch-level strength, even overpower gene seed Primarchs. They are extremely hazardous. But there is an even more catastrophic race waiting in the future, the Tyranids, the true scourge of the galaxy. They are the ultimate genetic predators, the great devourer that consumes all life. Fortunately, those full hive fleets are still almost 10,000 years away. So far, only scouting swarms have reached the galaxy. Even the Behemoth, Kraken, and Leviathan hive fleets that will later strike the galaxy are considered scouts compared to the Tyranid main force. Rumor even has it the Silent King of the Necrons was driven back by the Tyranid main swarm. The Space Necrons themselves are another Overlord-level race. The Necrons active in the galaxy now are pitifully few, Handband King being one of the only known ones, but they have almost maxed out physical technology. They can travel faster than light in real space without the warp, create black holes, collapse stars, and even possess weapons like the celestial orrery capable of igniting entire stars. Monstrous beings like these make it dangerous to be reckless. Even as a Super Saiyan, Axis dared not be careless. He cultivated cautiously. Only when he had ascended to godlike power would he consider letting loose. At minimum, he wanted the physical ability to cross the universe, survive a star's explosion, and withstand a black hole. "Axis, are you listening to me?" Kasha called. He seemed distracted. This was important. "Of course, I have a feeling we'll run into those orcs soon. When we do, I'll send those two cultivators out to deal with them," Axis replied. Scions and orcs had similar temperaments. Both loved fighting. One was a race of warriors, the other a warlike species. It seemed like a natural fit, but Kasha rolled her eyes. Encountering orcs was never good news. They were one of the most troublesome opponents in the galaxy. They fought for the sheer joy of fighting. "Enough talk. I'll use my ki to strengthen your body. If your body becomes stronger, Won't you be able to access more psychic energy? Axis offered. He had only occasionally boosted Kasha aboard the ship. Most of his time had been spent strengthening the dozen or so custodians. Your chi does help my physical body, Kasha said. It improves fitness and stabilizes me when I use psychic power, but it doesn't increase the raw psychic power itself. Psychers are different from what you think. Psychic power isn't produced by the body or by will alone. It comes from the soul. If your soul is strong enough, you can tear a rift between the warp and the real universe, draw energy from the warp, and release it into real space. That's what psychic power is. If the body or will is weak, your soul can be exploited by warp entities and turned into a flesh portal. If your mind and body are strong, your psychic use will be more stable, and in theory that makes you more powerful. Axis nodded. His chi could strengthen the body, and that would make psychic use steadier. So the stronger the soul, the more psychic power you can extract from the warp? Exactly. My father, the Emperor, has the greatest psychic power of any human, and one of the strongest presences in real space as well. Not even all human psychers combined could match him. How powerful is he exactly? Give me something tangible, Axis asked. Kasha smiled and described it with pride. According to my mother, thousands of years ago, Father could compress a star and turn it into an energy core with his psychic power. He could come and go through the warp at will, unafraid of its demons. When humanity still used cold weapons, he teleported himself to Mars using psychic power. He defeated legendary fragments of star gods. If he wished, he could forcefully rewrite someone's memories, manipulate their five senses so they see and hear whatever he wants, or alter his own size. Normally, Father is not taller than a Primarch, but he can grow into a near 5-meter giant or larger without issue. He can control wind, fire, thunder, and lightning freely, crush a planet with telekinetic force, and even speed up or slow down time across an entire star system. Axis listened, impressed. The Emperor's psychic power was staggering, but a question nagged at him. If the Emperor was so strong, how did he come to be endangered during the Ulanor Crusade? Logically, an Orc war boss that a Primarch could defeat shouldn't have been able to injure the Emperor, unless the Emperor had allowed a favored son to take the glory, to let Horus demonstrate his power and prestige so he could be named War Master. Axis couldn't think of another reason the Emperor would be vulnerable. Still, even if the Emperor was the strongest human psyker, he might not be the strongest being in the real universe. 10,000 years later, the tyrannid Great Devourer's psychic mass might rival or even surpass the Emperor's. The hive mind can project across star systems, and when a hive fleet appears, it creates a warp shadow that drives psychers mad and disrupts Imperial communications. Tyrannids also field many psychic organisms, neurothropes, Norn queens, Norn emissaries, and the like. When librarian Tigurius of the Space Marines connected to a hive tyrant's consciousness during the first Tyrannid invasion, he nearly had a brain collapse. It's easy to imagine how powerful the Great Devourer could be. By the way, Kasha, do you know any way to strengthen the soul? Axis asked. Strengthen the soul? Kasha considered. A soul's strength is tied to consciousness and is mostly congenital. Without exceptional circumstances, it doesn't change much. Take the Eldar. Every Eldar's soul is far stronger than a human's. They're natural psychers. The idea of strengthening a soul through training is unrealistic. Psyker talent is determined at birth. Training can only help you master what you were born with. Kasha had already guessed Axis's worry. His soul was reportedly weak, ordinary, according to the Emperor and Micardo, despite his great physical power. If there were a reliable way to increase soul strength, psychers could be mass-produced instead of appearing randomly. Kasha, can you see my soul in the warp? Axis asked. Maybe she could enlighten him, or at least confirm. I can see your soul projection in the warp, she said. It's not strong, ordinary like a normal person's. Axis bristled. I don't think so. I believe chi can do more than strengthen the body. It can strengthen the soul too, make it exist like a physical thing. It could bleed, cultivate, eat, sleep. Kasha couldn't hold back a laugh. Axis, you're making me laugh. The soul isn't a physical entity. It's a projection in the warp. We're in the warp right now, Kasha. Look at my soul projection again, Axis insisted. All right, since you insist, I'll humor you, Kasha sighed. Chapter 74. The golden ring above the head is sacred and radiant. Axis couldn't accept the idea that his soul was weak and unremarkable. Why were the souls of those people in the Dragon Ball world all monstrously strong? Why were their souls so clearly like their physical bodies, while his felt like a weakling? He was a Super Saiyan, even if he had become one later in life. He had spent 24 years in the cultivation tank. His body had been instinctively operating with chi the whole time. Even if his soul wasn't on the level of Son Goku's or Vegeta's, it should at least exist and be intact. In the Janemba movie, when many villains escaped hell, the cultivators that came out all had physical forms. "Do I have to clear my mind or something?" Axis asked. "No need. Your physical body is here. I can locate your soul projection from your body and give you psyker vision so you can see your own projection," Kasha said. Axis nodded and waited. Even inside a warp pocket shielded by a Jeller field, with her powerful psychic talent, Kasha could still let Axis see his projection up close. Her eyes glowed gold, and a halo of light bathed her. She raised her psychic staff and poured golden energy into Axis. Under Kasha's focus, Axis's eyes slowly took on a golden sheen, and a different perspective opened up. This was psychic sight. In the purplish-red warp stretched countless worlds of energy and dream, none of it real in the material sense, all dreamlike. This was the high heavens, the warp's true face. Look carefully, Axis. In the warp, ordinary people's souls do have projections, but they're incredibly faint, so faint that even most space demons can't notice them. They appear as tiny, negligible dots, Kasha said. Axis concentrated, and following her method, peered outward. He saw pinpricks of light, each one the soul projection of some living being. "Kasha, I don't see my soul's light. How can I see my projection?" "I've already reflected it close to you with psychic power," Kasha said, frustrated. "If you can't see it now, that means your soul's projection is invisible. It's that weak. Even the weakest psychers, in the warp, can make out a dim speck. Ordinary people sometimes are nearly unobservable." The tiny spots Axis had seen were actually psychers. Across the galaxy, many planets have human life. Even if true psychers are rare, they still number enough to stand out. "I feel like my soul isn't projecting in the warp," Axis said. "It seems to be inside my body." "What do you mean, inside your body?" Kasha blinked. After a being is born in the material universe, the soul forms a projection in the warp. The souls are in the warp, not here. The real universe can't contain a soul. Space demons devour souls by coming into the material universe, making warp-formed bodies to kill humans, then using the link between a person's body and its projection in the warp. They locate the projection and then devour it. Human fear, joy, anger, pain, they all feed space demons, too. She had never heard of a soul that existed inside the body. If the soul projection in the warp is extremely faint, it just means the soul is weak. Axis kept his psychic sight and moved to a mirror. He looked at his reflection. It was himself, unchanged. "You can't see your soul in a mirror either," Kasha pouted. "Mirrors don't show warp projections." "But that kind of unremarkable projection is also the safest in the warp. Space demons can't sense you at all. A bright soul is like a lighthouse. If you fall asleep or meditate, you become a target." Axis shook his head, signaling her to stop talking. Psychic sight could reveal soul lights, but what if he added chi? He sat cross-legged, mobilized his internal chi, and focused it into his eyes. A blue glow pooled there and merged with the golden psychic light. The scene changed again. Through his chi perception, Axis saw a multitude of faint lights that psychic sight alone had missed. Souls of everything from cats and dogs and fish to humans and mighty beasts. All their soul projections were visible to him. Kasha, despite being the operator, couldn't see them without Axis's aid. If space demons could see this, it would be a banquet. But as long as a being lived, its soul remained only a projection. Space demons could sense but not seize it without killing the body first. "What's wrong? Do you want me to dispel the spell?" Kasha asked. "Wait a moment. Keep it," Axis said, waving her off. Now he was sure. He had a soul, and it was powerful. In his own perception, those small lights that were psychers looked weak. He felt far stronger. Kasha sighed and kept her staff raised, feeding golden psychic power. How long did this boy intend to stare? Axis confirmed something else. His soul and body were integrated. Unless he died, his soul would never leave the body. He returned to the mirror, and with psychic sight aided by chi, looked again. It was still him, but now a golden halo hovered above his head in the reflection. That halo was a symbol of a soul body in the Dragon Ball world. In some traditions, it marked death and was called an angel's halo. A small smile tugged at Axis's lips. In a purely psychic state, he couldn't see his soul's halo. Add chi, and with Kasha's psychic assistance, he could. Through the mirror, he saw his true soul. Kasha came over and peered into the mirror too. At first, the Axis in the mirror looked ordinary. "What did you see?" she asked. "I saw the truth I've been searching for," Axis said happily. Kasha was speechless for a moment. Hadn't she told him mirrors couldn't reveal soul projections? What was he doing? She shook her head, but then noticed that, besides her golden psychic glow, Axis's eyes had a faint blue aura tinged with green. Looking into his pupils, she saw something different in the mirror. Another Axis, and on that other's head a golden ring. "Did you see something? I saw a golden halo through your pupils," Kasha said. "Yes, that's the representation of my soul. It's a materialized soul, nourished by chi," Axis replied. "Don't be ridiculous. Souls can't materialize. Even my father's soul in the warp didn't look like that," Kasha protested. She remembered the first time she entered the warp with her father, a cold, dark sun that radiated unimaginable fear, dark, pale, and cold, yet radiant. "That's my soul. I'll let you see it clearly," Axis said. He put his hand on Kasha's shoulder and poured chi into her body, guiding it to her eyes. A faint blue glow and green luminescence spread through her pupils, oddly complementing her golden psychic light. Kasha's vision shifted. She finally saw exactly what Axis had seen, him in the mirror with a golden halo above his head. Axis's body radiated an intense aura that almost stung her eyes. The golden ring emitted a sacred light, unlike warp power, unlike the warp's chaotic evil. It was indescribable, an ineffable sacredness. Axis's soul sat within his body and was immensely powerful and holy, reminiscent of her father's soul in its radiance. That golden halo did not stem from the warp at all. It felt like a different power, something beyond the warp. "I see it," Kasha breathed. "Axis, that golden halo, it's blinding. Your soul is so powerful, so radiant." Makardo had been wrong. Her father, the Emperor, had been wrong. Axis's soul was not unremarkable. It was extraordinary, sacred, wondrous. "I told you my soul couldn't be weak. When I cleared the Second Legion, I used mental power to lock onto half a planet's Astartes. If my soul wasn't strong, I couldn't have done that," Axis said. "How strange," Kasha said. "You're truly special. With a soul like that, you should be able to manipulate warp energy to wield powerful psychic powers. Maybe it's because my soul is tightly bound to my physical body. It never projects unless I die. And I can see it in mirrors because, in my homeland, there's an old legend that mirrors let you see another world," Axis said. If his guess was right, Magnus might be able to help him learn psychic arts. If not Magnus, he could ask the Emperor. "You're going to Prospero to see Magnus then? To have him examine your soul? Or to teach you to use psychic power?" Kasha asked, catching on. With a soul like this, it would be a waste not to study the warp's psychic disciplines," Axis said. A soul strengthened by chi for nearly 30 years was not ordinary. "I understand. I'll help you, and I'll keep your secret. It's an honor to see your powerful, sacred soul," Kasha said. "You can call it sacred and powerful, but beautiful isn't really appropriate," Axis said, uncomfortable at the compliment. "Your soul is beautiful, breathtaking. Other human souls don't appear like yours. They show as light spots, not in human form," Kasha insisted. "Haha, thanks for the compliment," Axis said. Chapter 75, Secrets of the Soul, Holy Angel Circle. "Axis, is it true, like you said, that Ki can also strengthen the soul? If so, will the custodes you enhanced and me get stronger souls too?" Kasha asked. Ordinary custodes were not supposed to have any psychic power. Against psychers, they operated with Sisters of Silence, soulless women who could blunt warp energy. If their souls could be strengthened, those custodes would be more resistant to the warp, and in theory, a sufficiently strong soul might even draw warp energy and manifest psychic ability. For Kasha, the implications were greater still. A stronger soul would let her draw more from the warp and transmute it through the Emperor's golden psychic plenitude. "I'm not sure. I only enhanced those custodes for a few months," Axis admitted. Their souls had not shown anything remarkable so far. His own soul had been growing under constant ki nourishment, but the custodes had only been infused with a portion of his ki. Besides, human souls in this universe were structured differently than in the Dragon Ball world. He couldn't be certain they could become true psychers. What about your two cultivators? They can use Kai too. Do they have souls like yours? Kasha asked. Axis's eyes lit up. Of course, he still had the two cultivator seeds he'd brought from the Dragon Ball world. Did they carry souls like his? I'll go check. They went to the training room. The two cultivators were in the middle of their daily drills. Axis wasn't sure whether their ki could grow like his had. He had them doing Dragon Ball training routines, physical conditioning, sparring, to see if their ki would respond. Do-O held back to make the sparring fair, suppressing his full strength. When Axis entered, both cultivators snapped to attention and bowed. Master, they said. At ease. I need to run an experiment. Don't resist, just relax. Focus all your psychic sight into your eyes when I say, and let your ki flow through your bodies, understood? Axis instructed. Understood, Master. We'll obey. Do-O nodded. The other cultivator made an eager sound. Begin, Kasha. Kasha raised her staff and released a surge of psychic power. She guided the two cultivators into a state of psychic vision and led them to a polished mirror used for soul reflection. Axis and Kasha watched closely. No golden halos manifested above the two heads. Their soul projections in the warp were stronger than ordinary humans. Kasha could feel that, assisted by Axis's enhancements, but they had not reached the level of psychers. Axis, they're not like you. Their souls project into the warp and are brighter than most humans, comparable even to some latent psychers, but they're not the same as yours, Kasha said. Axis gave Kasha a small nod. She shut off her psychic detection. The two cultivators relaxed their ki. Axis, Kasha continued, you really are special. Your soul is merged with your body. Even Father might not detect that without measuring your ki. These two shouldn't have a golden halo. Axis had long suspected as much. The golden halo above his head radiated sanctity, utterly different from the chaotic, corrupt resonance of the warp. I have a guess, Axis said. 2 reasons might explain why their souls haven't become like mine. Oh, tell me, Kasha urged. I'll explain when we're back. For now, you two will keep your physical training and sparring, and I want you to do daily ki cultivation, several hours a day. Sit, meditate, and let ki nourish your bodies. That's the plan. The cultivators bowed and followed him out. Once they were gone, Kasha pressed Axis for his theory. First, ki can strengthen the soul, but the process is slow. Second, these two were born less than a month ago. Their souls are stronger than normal humans already, but not strong enough yet to form a halo like mine. Let them continue cultivating ki. We'll check again later. Kasha agreed. The little green cultivators had been born recently and needed time to grow. She wondered if they might one day develop a golden, sacred halo like Axis's. Meanwhile, I'll keep nourishing your body with ki to see if your soul shifts. If it does, you should sense it, right? Axis asked. No problem. I'm an extremely powerful psyker. I'll notice even the slightest change, Kasha said. As a top-tier psyker, she could feel the subtlest soul shifts. Axis had one more unspoken hypothesis. The deeper reason the cultivators' bright souls hadn't formed physical projections and an angelic halo like his was that they were born in the Warhammer universe, not the Dragon Ball world. Axis had been born and raised in the Dragon Ball world for 5 years before crossing over. His soul retained the Dragon Ball world's state. The newborn cultivator's souls conformed to the Warhammer template and naturally projected into the warp. He was already about 70% certain that ki could strengthen the soul, but the degree, speed, and whether someone could bolster another's soul through their ki still required more experiments. Kasha, if I want to use psychic power, do you have any ideas? Axis asked. That's hard to say, Kasha answered. Logically, with a soul as strong as yours, if you can form a projection in the warp, you should be able to wield psychic power. Your golden halo seems capable of purifying the warp, transmuting chaotic energy into a sacred form. That's my inference. The reason I can channel sacred psychic power is a gift from the Emperor. My soul carries a trace of his attribute, so when I draw from the warp, my soul filters and purifies it. Your halo radiates absolute order. You might be able to do the same, but only if your soul projects into the warp. Without that projection, you can't connect your body to the warp to manifest psychic power. There was no immediate solution. Perhaps the Emperor could help. Even Magnus, if his study of sorcery were thorough enough, might know how to force a soul projection. The planned trip to Prospero to see Magnus suddenly felt more important. Kasha, when we meet Magnus, don't tell him all about my condition. Let me decide what to reveal, Axis said. He'd be cautious with Magnus. Before turning against the Emperor, Magnus had bargained with Chaos and had sacrificed an eye. Axis wondered whether that loss remained. Magnus supposedly made that sacrifice either to reverse the Thousand Suns mutations or to gain massive esoteric knowledge from Tzeentch and write the Book of Magnus. Professor A had even created the Red Thirst Warriors, the so-called empty cans. There were many mysteries. I understand, Axis, Kasha said. 2 days later, the Space Wolves fleet under Leman Russ entered a stable warp corridor and finally escaped the warp storm zone. Once clear, Axis and Leman Russ selected several Space Marines from the Wolves, preparing to strengthen them with Ki. This enhancement would be performed by Axis himself. Chapter 76, Enhanced Upgrade, Super Space Warrior. The first Chi enhancement program for the Space Marines was overseen personally by Axis. Leman Russ had carefully selected 20 elite warriors from across his great companies as the opening batch. These men were not just formidable fighters, they were the Primarch's most trusted confidants. When they received the summons issued in Russ's own hand, excitement and curiosity swept through them. They stood in the training hall in neat ranks, their power armor gleaming under the lights. Rumors fluttered. Had a special mission arrived? One of the Space Wolves called out, "Wolf Father, did you summon us for something?" "Silence," Russ replied. "I know this is abrupt. I called you here to increase your strength. You should know that Axis has mastered a power called Chi. It is not psychic energy. It's a force drawn from the material universe, and it's safe. When introduced into the body, Chi strengthens your physical constitution." A murmur ran through the company. They had seen Axis's power before. During the battle to defend the ship's accommodation, he had unleashed a torrent of energy that annihilated daemons with terrifying ease. None of them had expected that same power could be used to fortify a mortal frame. "Axis, Wolf Lord," one man asked, incredulous, "this Chi, is it really that strong?" "Believe me," Axis said, "Chi can greatly enhance your constitution and make you stronger." "Then let's begin. Axis, Wolf Lord, what must we do?" someone asked, eager. "Form a circle around me, sit cross-legged and hold hands. Remove your armor. Bare-chested is fine." A heavy silence fell. Sitting in a circle was one thing, holding hands bare-chested was another. The Space Wolves exchanged awkward looks. "Don't overthink it," Axis said. "Chi transmits through the body. Do as I ask." Reluctantly, they complied. The 20 of them stripped down, sat, and linked hands. It was an oddly comical scene. 20 bulky warriors, muscled and wary, grasping each other's hands, but none of them hesitated when duty demanded it. Axis took his place, seated in the center, and placed his palms against the backs of the 2 men nearest him. He breathed deeply and drew the Chi inward. A golden-green current flowed from him like liquid sunlight, pressing through his palms into the 2 nearest Marines and fanning out along the chain of joined hands. The first 2 men straightened at once, warmth creeping up their spines. Golden-green patterns began to shimmer beneath their tanned skin, like circuit traces on an interface, each pulse accompanied by tremors in their muscles. The energy crawled along the linked hands like a living thing, seeping into muscle, bone, blood, and cell. Space Marines are not simple men. Their bodies already contain the 19 implanted organs that make them more than human. 2 hearts, specially modified lungs, a black carapace beneath the skin, and more. Axis had worked with other enhanced bodies before. The Custodes responded differently, their enhancements being overall rather than organ-specific. But for Astartes, the implants were the key. He concentrated his efforts on them. Chi washed through those 19 organs, cleansing and amplifying. Muscle fibers twitched and thickened, becoming denser and more explosive. Bones hardened and gained density beyond the norm for even Space Marines. On the cellular level, the enhancement knit itself into tissue. It was as if each cell had been bathed in warm sunlight and told to grow stronger. 3 hours later, Axis withdrew his hands. The first session was over. "I feel it," one of the warriors breathed. "My strength, there's a real increase, and my body, so comfortable." It's like sinking into a hot spring after a hard battle, another agreed. My strength's up at least 20%, a third said. It's not just strength, my hearts are beating harder. Russ watched, satisfied. Let's see what you've gained, he said. He encouraged what other chapters might forbid, sparring among the brothers. As children of Fenris, testing one another only strengthens camaraderie. So long as none are killed, let them fight. What followed was boisterous and friendly, a flurry of punches and kicks, hoots and laughter. The 20 newly enhanced warriors tested and trusted one another in ways words could not. Axis stepped to the edge of the mat, picked up a combat power reader, and scanned them. The device beeped and displayed 85. Where their baseline had been roughly 70 to 75, they had jumped by about 10 points, now above the average Astartes. Axis assessed the situation. The results exceeded expectations, he told Russ, but the process is slow. I can sustainably enhance about 60 people a day. At that rate, it'll take years to reach the entire chapter. Russ rubbed his chin. Indeed. Axis smiled faintly. We'll need help. 2 assistants will do, cultivators who can transmit chi as I do under my direction. With 3 of us working, and a few small disguises for the process, we can speed things up. Russ agreed. Pacing would be easier with helpers, and new recruits later would be simpler to bring along. That day, Axis and his assistants pushed through 80 men, more than sustainable, but achievable when needed. Over the next hours and days, plans were put into motion. The next morning, 2 strange devices appeared in the training hall. Men were told to slip their arms into their cavities and receive the enhancement. What they did not know was that each device housed a cultivator, transmitting chi to each warrior exactly as Axis instructed. A cultivator could work on fewer men at once, about 10 at a time, and took longer per session, but used together, they multiplied the output. With Axis and 2 cultivators working in concert, the operation accelerated. In a month and a half, they had upgraded roughly a third of the Space Wolves aboard the Gloriana-class battleship, about 7,000 Astartes, turning them into what Axis began calling Super Space Marines. Most saw their baseline combat power pushed beyond 85. Some of the elites cracked 100. The chapter's overall strength rose significantly. Ships on other battle barges would be dealt with once they emerged from the warp. While in warp travel, each ship's Jeller field operated independently. Vessels could not safely connect or transfer personnel without Jeller protection. It remained too hazardous to attempt ship-to-ship enhancement until they were back in real space. By the end of the first campaign, the first wave of Space Wolves had been transformed. The next phase would be to expand the program across the fleet, slowly, methodically, until Fenris's sons carried the golden-green tide within them and stood stronger than ever before. After a month and a half of travel, Russ's Space Wolves fleet finally dropped out of the warp. They were in the Prospero system now, only a few days from the planet itself. Axis could at last take command of his Dauntless-class cruiser. The battleship, formerly assigned to the 2nd Legion, had been transferred to the Space Wolves by Imperial Naval Decree at Russ's request and would serve as Axis's flagship. It was a Dauntless-class light cruiser, 4.5 kilometers long, roughly 0.6 kilometers across, displacing 20 million tons and normally manned by some 65,000 personnel. Axis, Russ, and Kasha boarded a small shuttle and went aboard. Great Geneseed Primarch, Axis Wolf Lord, I salute you both. I am the first mate aboard this cruiser, the mortal first mate said, bowing to Russ and Axis. He already had Imperial orders. The ship was now reassigned from the 2nd Legion to the 6th. No need for formalities. Bring me up to speed on this vessel, Russ said, waving him off. Russ planned to give Axis experienced men as anchors for the new recruits. Axis was to receive 900 fresh Astartes and 100 veterans transferred from other great companies, 1,000 men in all. Truthfully, a single Dauntless-class cruiser was a tight fit for that many Space Marines. Ideally, Axis would want something larger. But this was a transitional assignment, and they would make do. Yes, my lords. The cruiser is named Wayfarer. It's a Dauntless-class light reconnaissance strike cruiser, built to carry ample fuel and stores and to operate independently of the main fleet for months at a time. Its shields and turret armor are only about half as robust as those on a full-sized cruiser, and its void shield array is slightly weaker. But it has faster engines and strong assault capability. Its agility rivals a sword-class frigate. The forward mountings are heavy lance arrays capable of threatening large warships, while the port and starboard batteries are macro cannons able to shred frigates. The bow lance can be swapped for torpedo tubes for heavier ship-to-ship strikes. In engagements with similar ships, the Dauntless has an edge, and even versus larger cruisers, it can hold its own, the first mate explained proudly. The Dauntless was a popular and versatile hull in the Imperial Navy, reconnaissance, raiding, fleet support, and at times, a frigate's role. What about accommodation? How many Astartes can she take? Axis asked. Axis Wolflord, this ship served the 2nd Legion under the 43rd Company. They numbered just over 150 Astartes. If you bring more Space Wolves aboard, I could expand their quarters a little by reallocating sailors' berths, the first mate admitted. But at most, she can take 400 Astartes. Space Marines need single accommodations and vast stores of equipment and rations. Mortal sailors are quartered several to a cabin. Even with aggressive conversion, the practical ceiling is around 400. Russ frowned. A Legion company normally numbered a little over 100, rarely more than 200. Only the Space Wolves' great companies were larger. The problem, however, wasn't just space. The Wayfarer had been battle damaged. Her crew roles were also disrupted. How many sailors and Navy personnel remain aboard? Russ asked. The original complement was 65,125, the first mate replied. About 40,000 were sailors, and roughly 20,000 were Navy combat personnel. We lost heavily in action with the Raiden. Naval casualties were severe. At present, only around 2,000 Navy crew remain. The sailors are largely intact, so there are still over 40,000 of them. We also have more than 100 Mars tech priests, several hundred militiamen from Mars, a few thousand servitors, and a navigator with his escort. He left an unspoken pitch. The ship needed mortal Navy personnel to operate. There simply weren't enough gunners left. Axis looked at the first mate. If we remove the Navy and convert their rooms to Astarte standards, we could house 1,000 Marines, he said bluntly. No. The first mate snapped. Forgive me, Lord Axis, I do not wish to disobey. But without the Navy, there will be no one to man the macro cannons, lances, torpedo tubes, and weapons arrays. Each macro cannon requires hundreds of trained crew to operate. All of the ship's systems, weapons, reactors, magazines, logistics, rely on mortal hands and servitors. On an Imperial ship, the Astartes are the supplemental element. They are delivered to the field and perform strike missions. Siege operations, occupying territory, and sustained ship operations are the work of mortal auxiliaries. Russ agreed. Axis, without the Navy, she's a defenseless merchant hull. Her weapons would be useless. How many crew are needed to keep her combat capable? Axis asked. At minimum 20,000 Navy personnel, the first mate said. Anything less and we can't keep the weapons or the combat systems functioning, nor can we launch proper boarding or landing operations. To free space for 400 Astartes, I'd still have to remove about 2,000 sailors by cramping quarters. Axis considered. The trade-off was clear. More Marines aboard meant losing the ship's full combat capability. Russ made the decision for now. Then we'll do it this way, Russ said. I'll assign you 300 new recruits from Fenris and 100 veterans from other companies. You'll form a 400-man company to begin with. Recruit the rest slowly. When your Avenger-class cruiser arrives, it will join the Wayfarer under your command. Agreed, Axis replied. From today, the cruiser is under your command. I'll send the veterans over shortly. When we reach Prospero, the new Fenrisian recruits will be transported here, and you may select from them. Axis accepted and with Kasha officially moved aboard the Wayfarer. The first mate escorted them on a tour so they could inspect the ship's condition. Axis requested and had a 100-square-meter training hall prepared in his captain's quarters. I think we could jettison the navigator, Kasha said later. I can do the navigator's work. You're emissaries of the Emperor, not part of the Imperial system, Axis replied. Keep the navigator. He's only one person and takes little space. The next day, Axis returned to Russ's flagship to take delivery of the 100 veterans assigned to him. Almost every great company had contributed 10 men. These veterans had served for over 20 years, short by later standards, but veterans in this era. "Gentlemen, welcome to my squad, to my wolf pack, the 14th wolf pack," Axis said, facing them. "For the Imperium, for the Great Allfather, for Lord Russ," the veterans shouted in unison, their fists striking their breastplates. "Report first aboard the Wayfarer. Learn your quarters. From now on, you serve on that ship," Axis ordered. He told Russ that these veterans had not yet been augmented. They could be strengthened while serving with him. The veterans nodded and boarded the transport together, heading for the Wayfarer. With 2 days to go before Prospero, Axis stayed aboard Russ's flagship. The fleet would be navigating within the system, no warp shock to worry about, and Axis planned to go with Russ to meet Magnus when they arrived. "Axis," Russ said as they stood together, "from today you're a company captain with your own wolf pack. Do well. I plan to promote you to my Deputy Lord Commander." "Deputy Lord Commander?" Axis frowned. "The Imperium doesn't use that position. A Primarch's adjutant is normally a first company captain." Russ laughed. "If I say it exists, it does. Wait and you'll be my Deputy Lord Commander." Axis smiled, but then asked a question that had been on his mind. "Old man, why is Magnus still at Prospero? You and the other Primarchs are campaigning. Why is he staying on that sorcerer world?" Russ's expression grew serious. "Magnus has only recently returned to the Imperium and needs time to assemble his Astartes and build the industry to make more of them. The planet where a Primarch is found becomes a Legion's homeworld. I stayed on Fenris for 10 years to build my wolf fort and to set up the industrial systems before launching the Crusade. The Emperor gives gene seed Primarchs time to recruit and to industrialize. 10 years is long enough to raise a generation of Astartes. So Magnus will only lead his gene seed into the Great Crusade in 7 years?" Axis guessed, recalling timelines. "If everything goes smoothly, perhaps sooner," Russ said. "Robert Guilliman entered the Great Crusade in his 7th year. Some Primarchs take less time, some more. Magnus returned recently and is eager. He was excited when I sent word and promised to treat me well." Axis's mouth twitched at that. Magnus at Prospero welcoming Leman Russ warmly. That would be unthinkable to a later age. 2 days later, the Space Wolves fleet arrived over Prospero's starport, still under construction. The long march across the warp had ended. History would be made on the sorcerer planet below. Chapter 78, Enthusiastic Magnus, Psychic Prophecy. Magnus the Red, now called Lord of Prospero, was the Emperor's 15th son. In the future, after making the most costly mistake in the galaxy, the young Magnus, convinced he had done nothing wrong, would become a daemon prince of the ruinous powers. He would be the Crimson King, the Lord of Sorcerers, the Cyclops, the Red Demon. But for now, Prospero prospered under him. Its oldest colonists were psychers, shunned by the rest of humanity, and the planet tolerated, even encouraged, the study of psychic lore and the mysteries of the warp. When Magnus first set foot on Prospero, he already possessed knowledge beyond his years, thanks to prodigious psychic gifts. Within a few years, he had risen to supreme rule, the most powerful sorcerer and unquestioned lord of the world. In those early years, he enjoyed a level of contact and intimacy with the Emperor that no other Primarch, save one War Master, could claim. A wolf fleet lay in orbit, and Leman Russ had ordered his warriors to remain aboard their ships. The Wolf King himself came ashore with only a small retinue, his son, Mr. Axis, Kasha, and a handful of Wolf Guard. They took a small shuttle down to Tizca, Prospero's capital. Waiting by the landing pad was a young man 3.5 meters tall, staff in hand and grave of expression. When he saw Russ step from the craft, his face lit up, and he strode forward with open arms. Leman Russ, hardy, impulsive, Fenrisian, returned the embrace with equal fervor, pulling his somewhat slender brother into a crushing hug until the Primarch's breath came short. Magnus, flushed with joy, returned the greeting with overflowing warmth. 3 years earlier, the Emperor had embraced him in much the same way. The memory of that rare family tenderness still stung. "Brother, well met. I am Leman Russ, son of Fenris, Wolf King," Russ boomed. "I am Magnus, King of Prospero, Lord of the 15th Legion. Welcome to my kingdom, to my world, brother. You are the first to visit. I am truly glad you have come." Magnus's voice trembled with an emotion Russ found unexpectedly intense. He looked at Mr. Axis and the Wolf Guard with something like reverence. Mr. Axis dipped into a courteous salute. "Hail, Magnus, King of Prospero. I am Leman Russ's son, Mr. Axis." Kasha gave a slight bow but said nothing. "Just call me Magnus," the young lord said, smiling. "There is no need for titles. I am pleased to have you here." A month and a half before, Magnus had received a psychic summons from Leman Russ saying he intended to visit. At the time, Magnus barely knew this brother and had planned only a modest reception. The duties of shaping Prospero and building his legion occupied him, establishing the gene-seed offspring, solving thorny domestic problems. Time was scarce, but then a vision altered his plans. Magnus had long trusted the sight his precognition granted him. As the most powerful psyker among the Primarchs, second only to the Emperor in mortal scope, his visions had saved him before. They had revealed his origins when he was young and guided him through peril. His prophetic sight had helped him defeat soul-eating horrors that beset Prospero and had secured his rise to kingship. So when he saw in a vision that the man named Mr. Axis would be central to his fate, that friendship with him would bring only advantage, avert certain disasters, and change his prospects, Magnus bent all his welcome around that prophecy. His enthusiasm made Mr. Axis uneasy. Magnus's warmth was unmistakable to the point of fervor. It was hard to know what the Lord would think if he learned what the future held, that the Wolf Guard would one day descend on Prospero and slaughter its many psychers. Mr. Axis had come from elsewhere, after all, and in his mind, he carried the knowledge that he had transmigrated into this life. That made stopping future tragedies seem possible. If the young Magnus could be kept loyal, the entire rebellion might be prevented. The instrument of that later catastrophe intrigued Mr. Axis. Magnus's later desperate act, a psychic shout that blew open the Emperor's webway and laid the groundwork for his ruin, sat strangely with him. Even across the gulf between Prospero and Terra, Magnus and the Emperor could communicate by psychic link without such theatrical measures. For the Emperor to be forced into a perilous webway contact suggested a warp disturbance at that time, the work of the ruinous powers. Someone had stirred chaos into a psychic storm, blocking normal channels of contact and manipulating Magnus into acting. Whoever engineered that chain of events had to be clever. If a single mastermind could shape that outcome, the hand of the schemer god, Tzeentch, seemed a likely culprit. "Come," Magnus said, by way of changing the topic, smiling at Russ and his companions. "Brother, Axis, I have prepared a grand feast in your honor. Let me entertain you properly." He led them toward his palace, talking the whole way about Prospero's people and customs. Psychic talent was not a curse here. It was ordinary, honored, even a source of pride. The palace welcomed them with warmth. At the head table, Magnus and Leman Russ ate under the keen watch of dancers and musicians. Course after course came, curious fruits and spiced meats, dishes prepared by Prospero's finest. "Make yourselves at home," Magnus said. "I know you two can eat. I have prepared plentiful fare." "Ha, that's true. Come on, Axis, another eating contest," Russ challenged. "All right," Axis grinned, and the two set to. An hour later, the Wolf King, predictably, had been out-eaten by the younger man. Axis's appetite was legendary. No one seemed able to match it. "Ha-ha! How do you cram it all in?" Magnus laughed. "Who knows? Maybe I have a black hole in my belly," Axis replied. "This boy has eaten me under the table since he was 5, Russ admitted, leaning back and groaning. He resolved then and there never to challenge Axis again. "You have a fine father-son rapport," Magnus said with genuine pleasure. Mr. Axis smiled and returned to his seat with Kasha. The evening spun on through talk of the Great Crusade, a subject Magnus was keen to understand, as he would soon join the Emperor's expansion. Russ spoke of campaigns, of other Primarchs, of the ways the Imperium was knitting itself together. "I hear Father is on a world called Baal, and another brother is returning," Russ said. "Yes," Magnus said. "I will tell you a secret. Our new brother is an archangel." He had learned of Sanguinius through psychic conversations with the Emperor. Like Magnus, Sanguinius possessed true seership. If his talents were developed, he would be among the Imperium's most gifted psychers, perhaps bested only few. Magnus listened as Mr. Axis asked Kasha about the difference between her power and his. "How to put it?" she said with a rueful smile. "If my power were 100, Magnus's would be over 10,000, maybe infinitely close to Father." She could not find words for the gulf. She had presumed her own gifts were impressive, but standing next to Magnus made her abilities feel puny. Still, she knew she had an advantage. Her matrix of perception seemed closer to the Emperor in quality, whereas Magnus's power had a different, stranger timbre. It felt, to her, like the touch of a being from the warp. The thought unsettled her. Imperial truth taught that there are no gods, yet the Emperor's might had always seemed godlike. Mr. Axis nodded at the description. Magnus's psychic might was undeniable. If anything happened to the Golden Throne, Magnus was the only one who might plausibly take his place. Midway through the meal, Magnus turned and raised his glass to Axis and Kasha. With the reach of his powers, few things on Prospero were private. Psychic conversations and undercurrents were audible to him. His attention made Kasha tense. She felt exposed. Fortunately, Magnus behaved with restraint. He did not force his way into minds. But the glance was enough to convince Mr. Axis to counsel caution. Kasha should not display her gifts freely here, not when Magnus's curiosity might draw unwelcome conclusions about her origins. When the banquet wound down, Magnus dismissed the performers and fixed his gaze on Leman Russ. "Brother," he said, voice suddenly serious, "I must ask for your aid. I have problems with my legion, with my gene seed offspring, and I need help." "Something has gone wrong? Tell me," Russ said at once. "Whatever I can do, I will." "My gene seed is different from yours," Magnus explained. "It can only be implanted into psychers. The stronger their gift, the better they match. But the success rate for the surgical transmutation has been disastrously low. In 3 years, I have only made just over 100 Astartes, while more than 1,000 underwent the procedure. That's a success rate of 1 in 10. These are children in adolescence, prime candidates for transformation." The name flashed unspoken between them, the Thousand Sons. When Magnus took command of the 15th Legion, its ranks numbered fewer than 1,000. Building the Legion to the tens of thousands other legions enjoyed seemed an uphill battle when a single procedure wasted so many lives. Russ set his cup down slowly, brows drawn. "That is impossible. For adolescent transformations, the success rate should be high, 70, 80%, sometimes more. 1 in 10 surviving is absurd." Magnus glanced at him, pleading. "How can you help?" Chapter 79, Magnus's Request for Help, Gene Seed Mutation. "I don't know either," Magnus said, shaking his head helplessly. He wasn't lying. Though he could glimpse certain things with his psychic gifts, he didn't know how to fix this. Russ's face filled with incredulous question marks. He gaped at Magnus. "You asked me for help, and I agreed. Fine, no problem. But you telling me I don't know isn't helpful. If you don't know, how am I supposed to help?" "Perhaps Father might have a way. Shall I ask him?" Russ blurted, a little stunned himself. Magnus looked taken aback. "Do I need you to contact Father? I'm the one among my brothers who can reach him most easily," he thought. "Still," he answered quietly, "what I mean is, Axis might be able to help me." Leman Russ's expression changed as understanding dawned. Of course, Magnus was thinking of using his little wolf cub. Ki could strengthen the body and had tremendous destructive capability, but Axis had never mentioned it could improve the success rate of Astartes transplants. "Lord Magnus, have you ever used a medical pod? Could it increase the success rate of the surgery?" Axis, who had been sitting nearby, chimed in. He had provided the medical pod back then specifically to improve outcomes of Astartes' surgical modifications. After he'd woken, he hadn't paid attention to whether the device had proven effective or whether the Imperium had managed to replicate it. Magnus blinked. "A medical pod? I've never heard of such a thing." Russ cleared his throat. "Cough. Axis's medical pod hasn't been successfully replicated. So far, the only things we've been able to reproduce are some energy weapons and the detection function of the combat power scanner." He regretted not telling Axis earlier that the Emperor himself had also studied the pod. It remained unreplicated, and the existing units were used only for custode surgery. Ordinary Space Marines were not allowed to use them. Axis had brought only a few, and they were kept on Holy Terra to train the custodians. Axis pouted. The Imperium's technological decline never ceased to disappoint him. A single medical pod, researched for over 20 years, still couldn't be duplicated. He had expected that aside from the hyperspace engine, which the Emperor could not copy, The Dark Age artifacts he'd given during the modifications would have been sorted out. Instead, the only successfully reproduced item was an energy gun with a tiny production rate. Only captains and above in the Space Marines could be equipped with it, and the custodes themselves had only been given a handful. Everything else remained beyond Imperial grasp. Russ sighed and looked at Magnus. "I'm sorry, Magnus. The medical pod is a human artifact of the Dark Age of technology that Axis and I discovered on Fenris. It can heal the gravely wounded. If they're not utterly dead, it can usually save them. But it's an Imperial secret. Axis mentioning it to you was a mistake." Magnus was stunned. He hadn't expected anything within the Imperium could increase the chances of successful gene seed implantation. But like other Dark Age relics, the Imperium had acquired it and failed to replicate it. During the 30K era, the Imperium had found many such items, but only a few were reverse-engineered. The decline in human technology was grim. Magnus felt a pang of sorrow. He hadn't suspected Father would keep the medical pod from him. If such a device had been available, and truly as miraculous as Axis described, many of the young psychers on Prospero might not have died during Astartes transplants. Russ shook his head. Even if a pod exists, it won't help unless it can be mass-produced. There are only a handful of pods. They won't suffice to modify an entire legion. Astartes transformation was a massive undertaking. Thousands, even tens of thousands at once, so any supporting technology had to be available at scale. The Emperor had once experimented. With pods, even older humans could undergo all 19 superhuman organ transplants. But to replicate the pod, you must disassemble it, and then you might not be able to reproduce it at all. So the Emperor prioritized arming the custodes first, to strengthen them. Astartes modification was a mature field. There was no desperate rush to copy the pod. "I understand, brother. I was just too anxious," Magnus said, nodding. Russ leaned forward. "Where does the problem happen exactly? On Fenris, the success rate is very high. If recruits are the right age, the success rate is 80 to 90%. Deaths are rare." Axis nodded. In the 30K era, the process of creating Space Marines wasn't as brutal as it would be in the 40K era, when needless trials lowered surgical success rates. The Astartes were meant to be mass-producible. Magnus closed his eyes. "I don't know why. The success rate for my recruits is very low. Maybe." He trailed off. Axis and Russ both saw the rest without hearing it. The Thousand Sons indeed carried a curse. At the beginning of the Great Crusade, the Legion had been relatively ordinary, not especially remarkable among the Astartes. But within 5 years, many of its warriors began to manifest psychic powers spontaneously. Then a wave of horrifying physical mutations followed. The mutation warped bodies, turning Thousand Sons into grotesque monsters. As the crusade continued, more legionaries mutated. Most became inhuman abominations. Those who survived mutation emerged with far greater psychic potency. In many ways, the Thousand Sons' troubles traced back to their gene seed, the legacy of their Primarch, Magnus. After Magnus returned to the Legion, he tried everything to prevent the mutations. He even sacrificed an eye, but nothing changed. By the 41st millennium, no remedy had been found. Some argued Magnus's gene seed had originally been normal and was later cursed by warp corruption. Others believed the mutation was innate. Survivors of the physical change grew ever closer to Magnus in power. Those who failed suffered a worse fate. Even Ahriman, the Legion's chief librarian and the most formidable psyker after Magnus, could only devise empty shells in desperate hope. Russ, who had his own worries, his gene seed sometimes produced werewolves, felt empathy for Magnus's grief. Russ reached out as if to comfort Magnus, then hesitated. Magnus was one of the most powerful psychers among the Primarchs, and most of his legionaries displayed psychic potential, even developing it later in life. Could Magnus's gene seed be somehow tied to the warp? The Emperor forbade them to study the warp, but Russ had experienced his own awakening after adopting Axis and being exposed to Axis's ki. He'd never used that power, but Father had told him ki could effectively block warp corruption. Perhaps they could let Axis try. Maybe ki could ease the gene seed's affliction. "Magnus," Russ asked, "at which stage of the Astartes surgery does the mortality spike?" "The first step. The moment my gene seed is implanted, that's the deadly part. 9 out of 10 die. Sometimes all of them. But if a recruit survives implantation and adapts to my gene seed, the subsequent surgeries go as smoothly as with any other legion. Magnus's voice was flat, tired. Then perhaps we can try Ki, Russ said. It's a special ability Axis has. It can resist warp energies during surgery. We could try infusing some of Axis's Ki into your gene seed or into the recruits themselves and see if they can endure the change. Maybe that will raise your success rate. What do you think? Chapter 80, The Flesh and Blood Mutation of the Thousand Suns. Professor A. Axis shook his head. The old man certainly had a talent for finding him tasks, but he needed Russ's help right now. If he could, Axis would assist. The condition was simple. Magnus's gene seed had to be genuinely susceptible to Chi. If it wasn't, Axis had no choice but to refuse. I've heard of Chi as a form of energy, Magnus said. When I spoke with my gene father, he told me it's a mysterious force, much like psychic power. At the moment, only Axis can wield it. It is mysterious, Axis agreed, but I can't reveal the specifics yet. Here's what we'll do. Tomorrow we'll perform a gene seed implantation and have Axis present. Then we'll see if it works. Very well. I'll gratefully accept your help, brother. And Axis, thank you, Magnus nodded to both of them. After the banquet, Magnus arranged for Axis, Leman Russ, and Kasha to stay in the palace. Magnus personally set about selecting candidates for the gene seed modification surgery the next day, hoping this time to finally resolve the afflictions ravaging his legion. If the surgical success rate could be raised, could Chi also address the flesh mutations affecting his gene seed offspring? If so, maybe he wouldn't have to seek help from darker corners of the warp. His gene father had warned him repeatedly not to trust the warp's lies, or any being within it. Magnus had even met the Blue Bird Man who had sought him out before his gene father did. He distrusted him utterly, resisted every temptation. Still, Magnus's hope flickered that something in the material world might save them. A few days ago, my divination showed it clearly, Magnus told Ahriman when the heavy-set, red-armored psyker approached. My brother Leman Russ and his gene seed offspring, Axis, can solve our legion's problems. That's why I invited them. Ahriman, over 2 meters tall and clutching a psychic staff, scowled. He was the Thousand Suns' most powerful sorcerer after Magnus, born on Terra, a veteran of the Great Crusade, a survivor of mutation whose own body stabilized rather than collapsed. He had watched comrades mutate and be purged, and he was furious that Magnus might have discussed the Legion's secrets with outsiders. Gene Father, Ahriman hissed, the flesh mutation of our Thousand Suns cannot be known by outsiders. I know, Magnus replied calmly. I did not tell them that the gene seed causes psychic awakening and mutation. I only told them that our modification success rate is alarmingly low. They don't know the specifics. There are no buts, Ahriman snapped. You cannot be careless with the Legion's fate. Magnus waved him off. My divination is clear. I will be content to follow it. Ahriman opened his mouth to argue, then sighed and left the Primarch's hall in silence. That night, Axis couldn't sleep. If his chi could influence Magnus's gene seed and boost implantation success, Magnus might urge Russ, or even the Emperor, to let Axis remain with the Thousand Suns to perform modifications. Saving an entire Astartes legion would be persuasive, but staying with Magnus was dangerous. The Chaos Gods, and especially that Blue Bird Man, coveted the Primarch and already tracked him. Remaining by Magnus's side would invite relentless peril. Axis had no intention of staying. If Magnus succeeded on his own, Axis could use a sample of Magnus's blood to cultivate a cultivator. He was curious what kind of cultivator the magic pony's blood would produce. Russ's blood had produced a cultivator who never underwent any werewolf-like transformation. Perhaps Magnus's blood would be different. The thought made Axis quietly excited. Axis, what are you worrying about? Kasha asked from beside him. Just thinking, he lied. I'm fine. We've worked this out. Is it about Magnus? She pressed. Axis nodded once. Don't worry. Magnus asked for our help. Whether it succeeds or not, he won't make things difficult for us. Good, Kasha said, then fell silent as Axis pretended to sleep. Morning came. After breakfast, Axis, Leman Russ, and Kasha followed Magnus down to the palace's vast lower laboratory. Staff bustled. The surgical suite was being prepared for a 12-year-old boy selected as the recipient. The child trembled, fidgeting with fear. Magnus stepped forward and, with a small psychic gesture, steadied the boy's nerves. "Don't worry," Magnus said. "You will be well." "Lord Magnus, I will honor you as my gene father," the boy declared with determined eyes. "I will succeed." Standing beside Magnus was the red-armored psyker Araman. Kasha leaned close and whispered to Axis, "This boy is a psyker. The man beside Magnus is strong in psychic power, nearly as strong as you." Axis nodded. Choosing psychers as gene seed recipients improved the odds. Ordinary humans implanted with the Primarch's gene seed often awakened psychic powers. Magnus's plan to use psychers made sense. Magnus led them to a sealed instrument. Inside were small, pale, fleshy nodules, gene seed prototypes harvested and cultured from substances taken from the Primarch. These uncanny organs were the source of the Astartes' superhuman strength and multiple organs. Without them, a human body could not support 2 hearts and the rest. "These are my gene seed," Magnus said to Axis. "I need you to try to help." "I'll do my best," Axis said, sliding a hand to the jar. He attempted to thread his chi into the mass within. The tissue responded faintly, but not with the vivid resonance it showed when inside a living body. Still, Axis worked, pouring his chi through the organic mass, purifying and stabilizing it as best he could. "I've purified the gene seed with chi," he announced after a time. "Now I'll lay chi into the boy, prepare his tissues, and then begin the implantation." "Thank you," Magnus said. Axis placed his palm on the boy's forehead and let his chi flow, a warm current moving through the child, aligning and nourishing his cells. After a few measured minutes, Axis signaled Magnus. On cue, the Legion's apothecary extracted the gene seed Axis had just treated, readying it for the implantation that would decide the fate of another soul, and perhaps, for Magnus's Legion, the fate of many more.